Take their seats. We'll go ahead and get started. We're running just a little bit late. We had to put a presentation up, but we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. Josh, could you please take roll?
Senator Bouchard. Senator Cost. Senator Cost. Senator Moniz. Senator Steinmetz. Representative Blake. Representative Clausen. Representative Haley. Representative Henderson. Representative Larson. Representative Simpson. Representative Tass. Representative Winter. Co-Chairman Boner. Co-Chairman Hunt. We have a quorum.
Everybody, welcome back. Most of you were here yesterday, I think, but before we get started, are there any elected officials, legislators or commissioners or otherwise who were not here, who are here today?
Mark.
Well, I'm sorry, yes, of course. Representative Kinner, welcome, and thank you. Yeah, any words? Just
No, actually, just have all of you here. We're really proud of the things going on, and one of the things that I mentioned, walk out the door.
Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you guys for hosting. This has been a good facility. So anyway, we'll go ahead and get started, and we have interim dean of the College of Agriculture here, and we'll start off with a presentation. So thanks, sir, and the floor is yours. Take it away.
All right, thank you. My name is Mark Staten. I'm interim dean of the College of Ag and Natural Resources at University of Wyoming. My objective here today is to give you a snapshot of the college. We'll review our programs, and also I'll take you through an overview of our budget. At the end of this discussion, I'll point out some of the bottlenecks and some hurdles that we face in going forward. But taken together, you should get a fairly good idea of how our operations currently stand and what we're looking forward to. So I really appreciate the opportunity to do this, and feel free to interrupt me at any point. So we really do have as an objective not only becoming a top-tier school, but I'll point out as we go along, we already have certain areas of excellence that we hope to build on. And these span a program that's extraordinarily wide. It's not just research, education, partnering, but as you all know, we're deeply embedded in the state in terms of youth programs. We have about 9,000 4-H'ers that are involved in youth programs with us, in addition to extension and our presence in the counties. So taken together, you add that to our service component. We have a veterinary diagnostic lab, we have the seed certification lab, we have the early early childhood education center on campus. So these things contribute to our service component as well. And as you know, we also have, in addition to funding from the state, we also have capacity funds, which is another word for federal funds, which come to us as our part of our land grant mission. So we'll go through this in a little bit of detail. Now, it is important to mention right off the bat that we are prepared, as it says, to make strategic choices about where we allocate resources. So that's a part of excellence, is identifying where we're good and where the needs of the state are and bringing a focus to those areas. So I'm going to let you look through this. You guys can take a look at the handout. We have, of course, some obvious reasons why we not only aspire to be the best, but but are obligated to be the best. So I'm going to let you read these on your own. But here's the process. So in addition to the snapshot today, we hope to speak to you later in the year and provide perhaps a more detailed strategic plan based on this snapshot, and provide you at that point with some specific numbers as to what we think it will take to provide an appropriate program for the state. So identifying priorities and initiatives, developing a comprehensive plan is a part of our forward-looking interaction with you and with our constituencies this year. So I'm going to give you a couple of updates on some of the highlights of our operations, and then we're going to take a look specifically at the numbers in our enrollment program. And at that point, I'm going to bring Associate Dean Wari Means forward. He handles academic and student programs. And when we get to the numbers, I'll let him step in if that's all right, Mr. Chairman. And he can update you on that. So if you look at the undergraduate range team, for example, they just beat out 26 other universities to win the Trail Boss Award at their national meeting. So in that competition, it's clear these kids are totally engaged in range and range management, and were very successful in their outreach. The judging teams, meat judging team, I just give you some examples here of their success. Livestock judging team placed third among 28 teams in Houston. The UW wool judging team won the competition at, and a member of the team was overall champion at the National Western Stock Show in Denver. So these programs are operating at a very high level. And as you'll see when we discuss budget a little bit later, in some cases we're one deep, so this success is somewhat precarious, but I'm very proud of our faculty and our students for being so successful. Of course, rodeo's been a success. That'll be my next stop on this tour, is the College National Finals in Casper. And I'm particularly pleased, in addition to 10 students competing in the national finals, we have 8 academic All-Americans. So Bo Clark has done a wonderful job as a new coach in bringing along both the athletic side of rodeo as well as the academic side. So I'm very pleased with how that program has kicked off. So a number of our meetings in Casper will involve meetings with some significant donors to the program, and both totally responsible for that success. So I did want to give you a heads up. There have been some recent developments. Of course, we have a transitional leadership team in place. That was my #1 priority when I came on board at the beginning of February. So Kelly Crane has stepped forward as Associate Dean and Director of UW Extension. That's a big step for us, and he's involved in the searches for 2 associate directors, which are crucial for stabilizing Extension. John Ritten, he's here as well. Interim Associate Dean of the Wyoming Agricultural Experiment Station and also Director of that program. Wari Means, you're going to listen to in just a minute, handling academic and student programs. Andrew Kniss has stepped forward as Head of Plant Sciences. So this will move along their program. We completed the hire of a weed scientist just recently, and he's looking to completing the hire for a new faculty member here in Sheridan. Chrissy Wade, reappointed as Interim Head of Family and Consumer Sciences. And as you know, Steve Paisley and Scott Lake are directing the Sheridan and, oh, not Sheridan, that's a mistake here, the Sarek and the Laramie R&E Centers. So not Sheridan, but Sarek. And then, of course, most important for me is we successfully hired a new dean, Barbara Rasco. She's from Washington State University. Her home department will be animal science. She's a food scientist, but also an attorney. And she will begin, her first day is June 28th in the college. So we are working on a tour to Wyoming for her. And later in the month of July, she'll be swinging through the state, hopefully meeting some of you. and meeting the staff at our R&E centers and beginning the process of becoming embedded in our state programs. All right, so our student enrollment and our sponsored grant research both show upward trends. And I'm going to let Wari step in and talk about student enrollment, but relative to the university, we're up higher than the broader set of programs across campus. So I'm going to step aside here and let Wari jump in.
Come on up.
Thank you,
Any
Mark.
question to this point so far? Okay.
Mr.
Go
Chairman,
ahead.
I'll continue with this. Just to point out some of the generalities of the data, as Dean Staton mentioned, our enrollment is increasing at a higher rate than average university enrollment, and we're happy about that, and we need to continue the trend. Nationally, the number of high school graduates will increase a little bit and then will start to fall, so we want to be strong in enrollment when that starts to happen. This shows enrollment of undergrads and masters and PhD students. And the little dip there in about 2016 was a national trend and reflects the number of students that were actually available to us. Our degrees awarded here, you can see the undergrad, the masters, and the PhD. You might note that our master's degree students are a little bit down from the 2012, 2013 era, and that represents, I think, a decrease in the number of faculty that we have on staff currently, and so there's fewer mentors for those master's students. We're hoping to build that up so we'll have a more robust graduate program. We have 8 degree programs in our college, and I'll just briefly go through these. Ag Business is administered by the Department of Agricultural and Applied Economics. Ag Communications is administered by our office, the Academic Student Programs. Ecology is a joint degree program administered by Plant Sciences and Ecosystem Science and Management. That program is currently under sort of a major revision in the undergraduate curriculum, and we're looking forward to strengthening that, perhaps even a name change to better place that in the market. Animal and Veterinary Sciences administered by Animal Science and Veterinary Science, so that's another joint program. There's also some curriculum changes that are probably going to be coming forward in the near future for that program to make it a little more, I think, representative of what our students are needing today. Family and Consumer Sciences is administered by the department of the same name. Microbiology is a joint program administered by Veterinary Science and Molecular Biology. Molecular Biology administered, of course, by Molecular Biology. Rangeland, Ecology, and Watershed Management is in the Department of Ecosystem Science and Management. And then we have some ag undeclared. There's some discussion in our unit about perhaps having a general ag degree, and we don't have one of those, but we'll see how that goes and discuss that with our new dean. We also have concentrations within degree programs, and these concentrations are so we can tailor a degree program towards our undergraduate students, and we'll see some of those in upcoming slides. And some of those you'll note, are lowly enrolled, but mostly we're not worried about those because they don't really cost us anything in terms of teaching extra classes or having extra faculty to have that program. First, we'll talk about agricultural business. And you can see here there are a total of 189 students. And these numbers are in flux constantly. Daily they change. And we have 4 or 5 different sources of data, depending on where you get the data, what time during the semester they capture the data. We get different numbers, but this is a pretty good average for us to look at. And then those are the concentrations below agribusiness management, farm and ranch management, et cetera. You'll note there's only 9 in international agriculture, and I know that the department is considering eliminating that concentration, but the other ones are more robust in terms of enrollment. In agricultural business, these graphs then that follow those first ones will give us the degree completions and also the enrollment for that year. And this is through 2017. The previous slide was 2018. So we can see that we've got some completions that are relatively constant. We have some growth in the ag business program. in discussions with the department head just last week, we've got some bottlenecks there because these students' numbers that are freshmen and sophomore are going to be needing some junior, senior level classes that we just don't have the capacity to teach. So we're going to need to add faculty in that area so that we can finish these students out in a timely manner. Next, animal and veterinary science, again, a joint program. There are 8 different concentrations here. And I think that those departments are looking at narrowing that down a bit, but 288 students. So that's one of our higher subscribed majors also. And they have different options that, for instance, communication, those departments don't actually teach the communication courses. They take those in other departments. So it doesn't really cost the department anything to have that option. But I think they're going to narrow that down a little bit. And notice also we have a majority of pre-veterinary medicine students. Probably about 7, maybe 8 of those students get into veterinary school. So, but a lot of students come in interested in that. Yes, excuse me.
Where did the bulk of those students end up then, if they don't go to vet school? Where do they go?
Chairman Hunt and Senator Moniz, those students still will have a very robust, if they stay in that concentration, degree in animal and veterinary science. Many of them change to a different concentration, like production or another concentration. Some of them even change majors. But I would say, by and large, most of them remain in agriculture, but they, for some reasons or others, they do not end up going to professional veterinary medicine school.
Did I hear you say 8 out of the 108, 103?
Yeah, and you got to remember that 103 is, that's the total freshman through senior and 8 of the senior class. So if you divided it in 5, about it works out if you have a fifth of them. So 20 seniors, 7 of those go to professional veterinary medicine school. And we have fewer and fewer of those. And we're a little unique because we see a blip sometimes in juniors. We have an increase in student numbers because of transfer students coming in. But if you have 20, 25 seniors, 7 of those are going to go to professional veterinary school. And actually those numbers across the nation are very high for a ratio of students that get into vet school.
Oh, follow up then, Mr. Chairman. Worry then, out of those 288 students that go freshman through senior, do you actually have a degree for animal biology?
We do.
You do?
Yes.
So you have,
It's a concentration. The degree is animal and veterinary science, and a concentration is animal biology. Another concentration is pre-veterinary medicine.
if they stayed in pre-veterinary medicine, they could get a degree in pre-veterinary medicine?
They get a degree. The degree will say animal and veterinary science
Okay.
with a concentration in pre-veterinary medicine. Yeah.
Interesting.
And that's what would be on their diploma.
Thank you.
Thank you. You can see this department also is increasing in enrollment and has a pretty favorable upward trend. Next department, Family and Consumer Sciences, there have several options also. 154 students, that's one of our more, I guess, higher number undergraduate programs. And this, I might just point out, go back here, it's pretty variable in this department from human nutrition and a pre-medicine sort of a track all the way to design, merchandising, and textiles. So it's a very broad range of faculty and degree programs and student interests that they address.
Senator Bonner, co-chairman.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just can you give a brief explanation as to why this is in the College of Agriculture? It seems like it's a little different. It seems like something to be more generic in arts and sciences. So just a little bit of background as to how this ended up in the College of Ag would be helpful for me.
Sure, Chairman Hunt, co-chair Bonner. Traditionally, this department was in the College of Agriculture and was named Home Economics. And we had traditionally an extension component that was Home Economics. And it has kind of morphed over the years, and the name has changed, I think, to improve marketing to our undergraduate students. And in our college, we think about communities and people and animals and plants. And this department is the people and communities part. So we have human development and family sciences, child development. Currently, I'm on a little task force and we're looking at a new degree program in early childhood education. And that would be a joint program between Family and Consumer Sciences and the College of Education. And it looks kind of promising. We'll see how that develops. But it's historical, but also I believe that it fits into our college. One of the things that we've kind of bounced around, maybe the new dean and I and some others, wool, if we talk about wool. Amy's back there smiling probably. But we have kind of reinvigorated our sheep program in animal science. And if we could hire some scientists in wool in the textiles area, maybe we could become a leader in the sheep wool kind of area, or a sort of a center of excellence. And it's an idea we're kicking around, and we'll see how that works out. I don't know if that completely answers your question.
No, that makes sense
okay.
for now.
Okay, carry on.
Okay, Chairman Hunt, thank you. This department has experienced some decrease in student numbers. Part of that, I think, is marketing to our students, our student base. Part of it is they've been pretty affected by the budget cuts and the decreases in faculty. So we're working to try to help that department and increase student numbers there. Rangeland, Ecology, and Watershed Management. This is another of our programs that we're pretty proud of. You saw a slide of the students. It's a competitive program, and in 2014, 2015, they revamped their curriculum, and you see a dip in numbers there. We had a dip nationally in numbers also that coincided with that. Also, earlier than that, 2013, a lot of their students were on the 5 or more year plan to graduate, and we've tried to clean that up a little bit. And so you see there's a decrease in numbers with a slight increase in 17, 18. I'm not too concerned about that, but I think that we do need to strengthen that program. And in terms of, we're in discussions internally about adding some expertise in actual on the ground range managements for our students. We're still the second largest subscribed program in the country, and graduating, I think, high quality students.
Go ahead, Senator Moniz.
Do you have a lot of industry come and interview your graduates as seniors? How do you market your graduates out of the whole Department of Agriculture, actually?
Chairman Hunt, Senator Moniz, that's a good question. The university has a career fair. We don't have as many ag-oriented companies coming to that as I would like. We do have some. Our college also has contacts with industry personnel. We are trying to strengthen our internship program, which a lot of the students that do an internship with, say, in this department, BLM, they end up getting a job with that entity, or if they're at a swine farm or whatever. If they're a good student, the company wants to hang on to them. So we have different ways that we can place our students. I've generally observed over the last quarter century that if it's a good student and they're half serious about college, they really don't have a problem getting a job and placing in agriculture. Some of the challenges, I think, are a lot of students maybe want to stay in the Wyoming or the Rocky Mountain West, and there are fewer jobs in this area than there are in other areas of the country. So if they're willing to move, they're going to get a job.
But the college really has no placement program whatsoever. I mean, if I graduated in eco-science and management, would I have to go out and look myself for a job, or is there some assistance through the college to help me find a job, or is there a placement program?
We don't, Chairman Hunt, Senator Moniz, we don't have an official placement program, but we get emails, department heads and the college and faculty too, get emails on a very frequent basis of job opportunities, and we make those available to our students. We're in conversations in my office about trying to organize that a little better so that students have a little better opportunity to see what kinds of positions are available, and then be able to apply for those positions. We do, if students want us to look over their resume or do those sorts of things, we do that. And in the capstone courses, often they do that to try to prepare students a little better for the job market, but not a more organized placement program, I think, like you're referring to.
One more. The reason I bring this up, especially in the eco-science area, I'm sure you're aware there's some other legislators that are extremely interested in improving this program.
I am.
That's why I asked if there's a placement program, because I would think BLM would really be interested in the folks coming out of this college. But that's why I asked the question mainly. But
Sure, and they are interested, and I think with a little bit of tweaking to that program, we can make those students even more marketable to those entities.
Further questions, anybody, committee? So with this 44% enrollment drop, would you say though that that's kind of a good thing? Like you getting those kids who have lingered out and or calling back the ones that weren't serious about completing the program? Because I mean, the enrollment numbers have dropped, but the actual completions haven't dropped all that much. So
Correct. Chairman Hunt, I think that's part of the what's going on with this is not completed. The curriculum was changed, a little more rigor in the curriculum. Some of those students were completed. We still have a little bit lower completion rates, but that hasn't dropped as much as the total student numbers. And it's very competitive. In the United States, I just was in Boston at an enrollment management conference a couple weeks ago. And in the United States, we have an overcapacity to educate our students. So it's going to be more and more competitive. So marketing and having exact programs that the students want is going to be important to us. And then being able to, as Senator Moniz mentioned, be able to place those students and have a record of that. And that's something we have very poor data on right now is our student placements and where they go and what kind of jobs they get and what kind of money they make. But we're going to work towards trying to get better data in that arena. But I think all those things will help this program as well as some of our other programs.
Yes, Representative Henderson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What's keeping you from that information now?
There's no real central way to collect it. The university is collecting some of that data, and I just saw some last week. So it's kind of like everything else you're going to hear from us today, I guess, is that we need another person to survey the students, summarize the data, and try to have a more focused effort on placement for our undergraduate students. And that's going to help, I think, also recruit more students if we can show that we're serving those students very well on the back end, that will help us recruit more students on the front end.
Yes, Representative Simpson.
At the top of each of your bar graphs, you're indicating a 5-year enrollment. I presume that's just a window. Most of your degree programs are 4 years through completion, aren't they?
Yes, Senator Simpson, that's correct. So that 5-year just refers to 2013, 14, 15, those years. So those bars are total enrollment, which would be every class, freshman through senior, and 5th year senior or however they go. And I do want to mention here that our average for our college completion, time to completion, degree completion is, I think, 4.3 years. So it's not that bad. And some students, there's reasons for that. Some students there isn't really, but some students have double majors or double concentrations or things that are going to take an extra semester in there. So 4.3 isn't that much greater than 4. And I was happy to see that data. I think that we just got that data about 2 weeks ago.
Now, believe me, for some of us, 4.3 years was a miracle. So,
I didn't want to talk about that historical data, Co-Chairman Hunt.
And another question I had, just in general, with any one of these programs or concentrations, are the enrollment numbers necessarily reflective of job availability and opportunity once they graduate? I mean, for example, going back to the animal and vet science, you've only got 6 kids in meat science or 6 in communication, but there's 40 in production, 32 in equine science. And so while meat science is maybe a small enrollment number, is that to say that that's not, I mean, that's fine because maybe there's only 6 jobs out there for a meat science graduate?
Yeah, Chairman Hunt, so actually, in this case, it's the opposite, but it's not always a high correlation. Students are going to get in a program, some are going to look at the job opportunities and the pay scales and everything and calculate it all out and be an engineer. I mean, if that's what they're motivated by. Other students are interested in livestock, and a lot of these students want to work with livestock. And there are actually more jobs in the food and meat industry than we can produce graduates for. That's a nationwide trend. Those jobs actually pay more, a higher pay scale, but the students don't want to work with meat. I might be an exception to that, but they want to work with live animals. So we have a smaller student numbers. All those students are placed at relatively higher paying jobs, I think, than our average undergraduate in the ANVS program.
Okay, carry on.
And I think that completes the portion of the program that I'm going to visit with you about. If you have any further questions, I'd be happy to answer them either now or anytime later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you much, Dr. Means. Are there any further questions for Dr. Means while he ducks out before we get to the money discussion? All right, thank you. Okay, Mark, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, committee. So the next thing I just wanted to mention, I'm not going to go into this in huge detail, but the college operates on a significant research budget. These are dollars obtained by competitive research proposals. The actual number for 2019 is probably going to exceed 26 million. So the upward trend is continuing. And as I mentioned before, this trend is a little bit precarious because our numbers of faculty are down and faculty are teaching more because of the teaching needs in the college. And so I would expect this trend to level out. So let's take a look then at the budget. This is a forward look. This is a summary of our FY20 budget. And the first point I want to make is a very basic one, and that is that if you look generally at our academic budget on the left, that would be instruction, grant-funded research, salaries going to teaching, that sort of thing. That represents a minority of our budget. That's 38%. A majority of our budget at 62% is extension. It's our R&E centers out in the state. It is our service functions, diagnostics, seed certification, et cetera, and it's our youth program. So taken together, we're unusual within the college, among the colleges at the university in the depth of our engagement in the state. And in fact, it's represented as a majority of our budget. So let's take a look at a little more detail. So this is a summary of our total revenue. And as you can see there, the 2 biggest chunks are our state block grant. Actually, it's referred to on campus as unrestricted revenue. That includes both the state block grant as well as some tuition dollars and a few other things mixed in, some foundation dollars. And then research grants are the 2 single biggest chunks of money. We split out a few items here so you can get a sense of how big those contributions are. You can see at the bottom, fee revenue represents about 4% of our budget. And that would include everything from the Early Childhood Education Center to our Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory. Our federal capacity funds represent about 8% of the budget. So that would be funding from the feds to support extension, forestry, multi-state travel, and hatch funds, which are research dollars. And then we do have a contribution from counties. So we have cooperative agreements with counties to support the presence of educators in those counties, taken together about 2%. And I'll say the foundation contributes as well. This is the budgeted amount for foundation dollars. So we actually have available some additional dollars in the foundation that were not budgeted by departments this year for a variety of reasons. The total book value of our foundation accounts is about $50 million, something like that. Okay. So that is what we budgeted as total revenue. Questions about that before I jump ahead?
Senator Moniz.
Yes.
Thank you. The unrestricted revenue source, that's revenue that doesn't dictate to you where you spend it, is that
Yes, and that's why, yeah, that's the name. So it is, I'm sure there are restrictions, but there are the fewest restrictions on those dollars as opposed to any of the other categories that we see here.
What's the source of your unrestricted revenue?
Well, the bulk of it is the state block grant. And then in addition to the state block grant, there are some smaller amounts that derive, I don't know what percentage of the total they represent, but there are smaller amounts that derive from tuition and from, there are some foundation dollars in that mix that come to us through Old Main. So they aren't foundation dollars specifically directed at the College of Ag. Those dollars are represented in the pie chart there under foundation. These are more general use dollars that come to us from the foundation. So the bulk of it, though, is the block grant, the state block grant.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. So are there?
Go ahead.
So where, any matching funds through donors that come into the college, where would that show up in this graph?
Well, that would show up in the foundation slice of the pie at the top of the chart there, labeled representing currently about 5% of our income.
And then your early child care revenue. What
Yes.
is that? Is it?
Well, in Laramie, if you're familiar with Laramie, we have a new early childhood care center, which is housed directly across the street from the hospital on 30th Street. And it has two purposes. It serves childcare needs across campus and the community, but a number of departments across campus use it as human development research as well. So there's a number of research projects that go on there. If the parents agree, then their child can be part of those studies. Okay, so it's a combination of academic as well as a service to the community. The college pays the salary and benefits for the director, but otherwise their expenses are met by fees. So that's the kind of the split in that facility. Yeah, a teaching lab as well. Thank you, Wari. It is an opportunity for students in family and consumer sciences to participate in childcare as a part of their training. So that's another element of that unit.
One more.
Well, go ahead.
He's heard from me before, but, so if you want to increase your budget, your options, your two basic options to increase your block grant or your block grant funding or your grant funding. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, those have the biggest impact. The problem with grant funding is that it is usually restricted by the requirements of the granting agency. So often they are project driven, that those funds are spent to study a particular issue. Sometimes it's very basic science, might be in genetics or molecular biology, or it might be in range management, might be wherever that faculty member is expertise lies. So those dollars are not particularly flexible. In terms of fees, we can always raise our fees, and that's a balancing act. As in the veterinary sciences department, for example, they're very sensitive to the question of fees because they have two they have two missions there. One of them, of course, is to serve the ranchers of the state. You raise your fees too high, and those people are not going to be able to afford it and thus not have available the service. The other thing they do, though, is surveillance. So it's very important that that department keep track of the incidence of disease of various types across the state as a part of anticipating epidemics, as a part of identifying and intruding new disease agent. So if you charge too much, then the rancher is going to be tempted to push that cow into the ravine, not get an accurate diagnosis, and so our surveillance function is impaired. So that's part of their decision-making process when they decide where to set their fee amounts. Currently, their total fees come in at just over $900,000 currently, and their operation overall costs about $3.5 million annually for diagnostic services. So we provide the difference out of our unrestricted funds. You'll see that in a minute. Okay, I hope I got to your question, Senator.
You did, thank you. One more question, if I could. We're coming into a budget session. Obviously, you have to submit your budget to the Board of Trustees and then further on to the governor. And we're all excited about agriculture right now.
Right.
This committee surely is, and I hope the rest of the state is. But what's your strategy going forward in this budget process?
We've submitted a request to the president, the acting president, and provost of the university for a supplemental budget line to not recover where we were before the budget cuts, but to enable us to fill some of the gaping holes in our program. You'll see those later, but those holes are an extension. And in undergraduate range management teaching, and in animal science. Those are probably plant science as well, but animal science in particular. So we see as a first phase here, stabilizing the programs of the college, which currently are doing a very good job, but they need to be shored up to ensure that we continue that. We're one deep in many areas, and we have now, especially in range, people teaching out of their expertise in order to keep the program rolling. So even the head of the department there is teaching 4 courses a year. And he's also, up to now, has been serving as head for 2 departments. So these are the sorts of holes that we need to fill. And I think probably looking ahead, I think as we want to address more programmatic focus areas that are of importance to the state, we'll probably ask for a second supplement in a subsequent budget year. But we need to do a more systematic planning process before we ask for those dollars, so that we're not just asking blind, but in fact we're providing a very clear staged set of objectives that we'd like to achieve. So first, what's gone forward is a request for the money to stabilize the college in its current mission.
We'll go to Representative Clausen first and then Representative Henderson. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, is your foundation, is it money out of the University of Wyoming Foundation, or is that a College of Ag Foundation?
No, this is, it's all handled by the University of Wyoming Foundation. The only thing separate in our college is the 4-H Foundation. So the 4-H Foundation handles donations directed at the 4-H program. We pay the salary and benefits of the foundation director, but other than that, their operation is separate. So that's the only fundraising entity in the college that stands aside from the UW University Foundation.
Good. Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
I'd like to go back to the fees that you charged, you talked about.
Right.
And you can provide this information offline.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like more specifics on how you come to a decision on what fees you do charge. So, I mean, I see you have salaries paid to county, from the county, that you charge the county for. I assume there's people working there.
Yeah, we have an MOU.
It's objective, that you lead you to the conclusion of what you're going to charge for a particular fee.
So Currently, the fees are set by the unit involved. So to a very good first approximation, the dean's office is not involved in that decision historically. So the seed certification lab, they make the decision on setting those fees. Currently, they bring in over $300,000 in fees annually, and then we pay the salary and benefits of the director of that lab, Mike Moore. Similarly, as I mentioned in vet sciences, and the same process applies in the early childhood center. So I will look into that and provide for the committee some information on the sort of criterion that these units use in order to set those fees.
Go ahead.
Thank you. The other part of that is obviously we want to prepare for the budget session coming up for the biennium.
Right.
I think I heard you say something about a supplemental coming up after on the other year.
Assuming Old Main says yes.
Mindset going forward.
Say
And I'd like to see what we're doing, and not just the next biennium, but the next couple of bienniums. I'd
Right.
like to see where you're taking the college over the next 3 to 5 years.
Right. One of the trends in the college, and this will continue, is a more highly focused program in the areas of range management and the ecology of range management, in high altitude agriculture. That would probably be centered out of animal science. So plant science and ecosystem science and management would be engaged deeply in the range management element of this. And what goes along with this always is the economics of these processes. So research needs to be integrated with studies of the economic impacts on communities as well as producers and businesses involved in this process. So that's really where the focus is going to be. My faculty are tired of me saying this, but I'll say it again. I think one of the things that the college needs is a deeper technological base, because as we heard yesterday with invasive species, those problems are difficult. Solving them will require a multifactorial approach, including, because we're a school of biology in essence, it's going to include the use of biological technologies that go beyond what we currently do. So part of this is going to be integrate departments like molecular biology a little more deeper into the core mission of the college, because these are the guys who bring with them the expertise in CRISPR-Cas9 engineering, in molecular markers. That's the language they talk. And so one of my objectives has been to alert these people that they're going to be expected to engage at various levels in the process of dealing with these state issues. So in the next biennium, I'm sure we'll go forward, at least we'll take it to Old Main, a request for the funding to, in a more project-oriented way, address these issues. So in the time that I've been here, we probably have not been able, we don't have the time or the personnel to adequately prepare for you a staged request. So I've been hesitant to bring that kind of dollars forward. But that's a key in the college, is that we need to absolutely focus. This has been a long-term focusing process, you know. We used to have a dairy in the state and a dairy program, you know. These things have slowly come to focus on what we do most largely in agriculture, which is forage, range, ruminants, and high altitude and the things that go along with that. So water. So these are our core interests. Yeah. Hope I got it. Your questions, Representative.
Follow up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Sir, but also you mentioned technology, but you know, there's a lot of opportunity, I believe, in smart agriculture for Wyoming.
Mm-hmm.
And it links with what we're trying to do to enhance broadband, for example.
Yes.
Help the ag producers get more value for the dollars that they're putting into their business.
Yeah. Yes,
I
Representative.
appreciate any specific information, particularly where your plan is and how you see it going forward over the next
Right. I couldn't agree more. And I've had conversations with Dean Pishko in engineering. So there we're looking at everything from the blockchain technology, which will put a position in our college, as well as remote sensing, smart technologies in terms of equipment. And these conversations I've also held with the Ecology program on the other side of campus, program in ecology in the Biodiversity Center, where they bring some really sophisticated imaging technology that has been high resolution, low altitude drone imaging, for example, that in the past has been used largely in very basic science. But now might be the time to port that technology over to agriculture and use it to drive down costs for our producers. So.
Yes, Senator Moniz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I would just like to add that the champions of the Agricultural College and the legislature are sitting right here, as well as the producers around the state. I think it's critical that you've got some big gaps in your programs in your college that need filled. Obviously, you understand that it's going to be difficult to fill those in one biennium. That's why you suggested that you were going to try to do it over a period of time.
Yeah.
But I think it's critical that whatever your vision is for the college, it be shared with your staff and all of us throughout the state, so we can champion your program. So when you get to the legislature, there's an understanding of where you're going, and you have a clear vision of where you're headed. So that's just a statement, not a question, but don't you agree?
I do, yes. And from my perspective, as soon as the dean arrives June 28th, I will probably stay on for another month, and that's going to be my project as far as I can see. So to begin the process of assembling we have a number of planning documents of various types that have been developed over the last year or two. And I think what we need to do is take those and build from them a staged set of objectives. And this would help not only in our communication with you, so that you're very clear on where we're going and in what steps we're taking, but also important to the foundation, so that when they build contacts and talk to our constituencies out in the state, they also can show them where we're headed in bite-sized pieces so that everybody's on the same page. So I'll hide in an office somewhere and start work on this document. And hopefully we can make a report to you in the fall meeting as to where we are in that process, let you take a look at what we've worked up. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
My question has to deal with the extension service. And I just wondered if we've taken a hard look at that. That's a fairly long-standing program just to make sure it's functioning efficiently and effectively for our communities, number one. But number two, with counties facing some budget problems as well, some of them may be looking at cutting their funding for that. And then how would that affect our extension program? Thank you.
Right. Currently, we have 6 counties for which we are not meeting our MOU obligations to fund an educator in those counties. And so that is a hole that we've immediately asked for funding to fix. In fact, I think the needs in extension go beyond those 6 positions. And our funding request to Old Main is requesting them to make an ask of you to fill all of these holes. So, it really doesn't matter if we do a lot of great groundbreaking research if we're not tied into the local communities and the counties to integrate that work into the operation of producers and industry across the state. So I see that as an integral part of the program I just described to you. And so, as everyone always tells me, it's a matter of priorities. But I think there's a baseline program in agriculture that simply needs to be supported. I think that we're at the point where we just cannot eliminate one leg of the 3-legged land-grant program. We just can't go there. So thus the request that we've sent forward.
Yes, follow up.
Just to follow up with that.
Yeah.
So one of the things I've heard locally that it can be a challenge is the hiring process, that the speed at which candidates can be selected. Is there talks of changing how that works a little bit to get the most qualified candidate in the most expedient manner?
Yeah, I remind our budget office of that problem probably every week. Okay. It is an issue. I'll say this about WildCloud and the new human resources module, HCM, that goes with it. At a strategic level, it's actually been very helpful. Okay, so at the 30,000 foot level, when you're assembling budgets and wanting to look at expenditures as a management tool, it's very helpful. Because in the past, that's been a handicap. It's been hard to use spending patterns in the past as a guide to how one might manage programs going forward. So that, in that sense, the new programs, especially once they're fully tuned up, which will take a couple more years, has been very helpful. At the day-to-day level in the departments, it's been a pain in the hind end because it's a slow process to hire. There's a lot more buttons to push online. There are more approvals in the process. And so that's something that I'm reminding them needs work. So this is the good and the bad of the new systems. So yes, that's an issue, and we're painfully aware of it. Yeah.
Committee, further questions? All right, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I won't belabor this, but this is our budgeted expenditures. So of the 57 million or so total budget, you can see that cooperative extension and departmental allocations are the two big chunks. If you look at the top three chunks, it also includes the ag experiment stations. Okay, these are expenditures from all funding sources. And if you look at the departmental allocations, that spans both the cost of putting on courses like teaching laboratories and so forth. It also includes budgeted expenditures out of their research grants. So a good chunk of that green pie slice at the bottom of the chart is actually expenditures of dollars on research programs. Okay. And just for clarity, we split out the R&E centers. Okay. From the Ag Experiment Station. The Ag Experiment Station more broadly not only manages the R&E centers, but also provides some research support on campus, such as graduate support, graduate education support, and project support. And then the instruction in the near the top of the pie, 13%, that is essentially a split out of the salaries. So faculty, I mean, pie charts are a little misleading sometimes because these elements of our mission they crosstalk. So for example, we often have faculty with a certain percentage of their salary going to instruction. That would be captured in one element of this pie chart. Another fraction of their time goes to research, and yet another fraction might go to extension. So the integrated nature of these programs is sometimes not adequately described by a pie chart where it looks like these things are separate activities. So this gives you a sense of how we divide our dollars, but does not capture kind of how the system works in an integrated way.
Yes, Representative Simpson.
In that instruction category, how many professors / instructors do you have in the department?
We have, I'll get to that in a minute. In fact, it doesn't come to my mind right now. We'll get to it in a second, and I'll cover kind of how we're divided among the different employment classes and how our staffing has changed over the last 5 years. Okay.
Representative Clausen.
So in slide 28, Mr. Chairman, excuse me. In slide 28, it says 62% of your budget goes to extension service youth. And then on slide 30, the slide before, it says 36% goes to extension, does that include some of those other line items in your pie or what's the?
Let me make sure I'm clear on your question. So, slide 30. Could you restate the question, please?
Okay, so slide 20, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah,
On
go ahead.
slide 28, it says extension service used is 62%, and then when you go to slide 30, the blue portion in that circle says 36%.
Right, well, that also includes much of our research out in the state, okay, which we've lumped together as engagement and outreach, okay? As well as 4-H programs, which aren't split out individually here. So that's the difference. I hope I'm getting at your question. Sort of. Okay.
Good enough.
So I'm happy to meet with you offline and we can sort out that difference.
That might be
Okay.
good. Further committee further questions? Okay. Well,
Okay. So perhaps more importantly, here's a breakdown of how we spend our state block dollars, our unrestricted dollars. And here you can see that we split out of the portion of our revenue that comes from the state. Roughly a third of that goes to the Ag Experiment Station and about a third goes to support the mission of the Extension Service. So this gives you a sense of the commitment the college has to these activities and the importance that we place on these activities. So the remainder of those state block dollars are spent on instruction, diagnostic services. So you can see that of the total cost of veterinary diagnostic services, we're contributing about $2.5 million a year toward that effort. That'll go up about 5% in the following year. Some money on distance education, and we spend about $180,000 on the rodeo team. So the cost of the rodeo team in total is about $600,000 a year, of which we're contributing this amount out of our block grant. So that particular expense is handled through kind of a mixture of funding sources. Although I'm very pleased with Bo, I think the trend is positive toward developing a program that's largely foundation funded. That's certainly my objective, and it seems to be Bo's as well.
on that issue, did the instruction quarter of that pie, did that include the salary of the faculty teaching? Or is
Yeah, that's largely salary. You can see there's a small amount listed there as program support, and that's largely teaching as well. Distance education was also split out. That's part of our teaching program.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that's what I was wondering is, so if a professor, like when you're breaking that down, if there's a professor who has an on-campus course and then they're also teaching a distance education course, where is their, what bracket is their salary being sent to?
Right. These numbers are calculated based on their job description. So if their job description says 29% teaching, then that portion of their salary is reflected in the instruction pie chart. And then the dollars that come to support that effort show up in other elements of this pie chart.
Gotcha.
Yeah, okay.
Cool. Yes, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to build my understanding here.
Yeah.
I appreciate the explanation.
Mm-hmm.
So building on the previous question related to the 62%, I'm trying to make the connection with the charts.
All right.
I'll take the example of the rodeo. In this graphic, you have the rodeo at 1% and a figure of 180-some thousand.
Right.
In the previous graph, you had the rodeo at 1% and a figure of 587,000.
Right.
And so I'm asking, what's the actual? What time frame are we looking at? And how can we make sure that we aren't blurring the numbers and blurring the lines here?
Right.
Trying to follow through.
Well, notice that in slide 30, the 587 is somewhat aspirational. This is Bo's budget for next year. And the way the budget process works on campus is that if you don't budget it, it's difficult to spend it. So he has budgeted aspirationally, anticipating donations and other sources of revenue that might come his way during this upcoming fiscal year 20. Okay. And as a portion of that, if you look in slide 31, you'll see that's what the college has budgeted out of our unrestricted funds to contribute toward that total. Is that, hopefully I'm being clear here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if I understand you correctly, then what you have totally budgeted for the rodeo is about $768,289.
Well, it's actually the, you can see this is the, if you go back to 30, the all college fiscal year 20 budgeted expenses. So we have, his number there includes the 180 that he's getting from us. Okay, out of unrestricted dollars, whereas the next one is the state block grant only. We're narrowing our focus to dollars that derive from the state block grant. And there you see the, out of that particular source of revenue, there's how much we're splitting out toward Bo's program. So it's a net of about 600,000.
So what you're saying is the 587 should be 600,000? What I'm trying to find out is what are we actually budgeting? And more importantly, what was the actual amount spent in the last rodeo?
Oh, so these numbers are forward-looking in fiscal year 20. So I don't have on the tip of my tongue what we spent in FY19, okay, to run the program. But looking,
please?
I could, yes.
Okay.
Mhm. In fact, I can send you a breakdown of all the sources of money that go into the rodeo program.
That would be great if we could get all that.
All right.
Committee for the questions. I don't want to, we're sitting on track here to lose all the time that Chairman Boner got us ahead on yesterday. So, that's all well and good, because I think that I'm glad that there's a lot of in-depth interest from the committee. But I do want to remind everybody that I think we're having a lot more time allocated at a fall meeting in September for this. So just I don't want to discourage anybody from making further comments or questions, but we will have several hours, I hope, dedicated to this when we meet in Wyoming in September. So keep that in mind, folks, and we'll keep going. So, Mark, carry on. Yes, go ahead.
Quick question.
Yep. That being said,
That
Senator
being
Money.
said, Mr. Chairman, I've got your other can we get this presentation electronically as well?
Yes, so Legislative Services has this. And I think what we'll have to, once graphic artists got a hold of this, it got enormous. So we'll give you access to the shared Dropbox account, and you can download this.
Great, man, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, carry on. Thank you.
I only have just a short comment to make on this in the next slide. That is, if you look at the Ag Experiment Station and their expenditures out of unrestricted dollars, most of this goes to faculty salaries, okay? Most of this is in support, and these faculty get salary dollars from the state out of our unrestricted pool. They also get salary dollars from our federal funds as well, depending on their role. If they're an extension, they have access to those dollars. If they're in research, then they have access to experiment dollars. So I think the major point here is that the large chunk of money being spent in the Ag Experiment Station out of unrestricted dollars comes for faculty salaries. And the same, you see a similar picture in extension. So out of our unrestricted dollars, our state dollars, the majority of those dollars are going to salary. And this slide kind of foreshadows what I will be talking about in terms of personnel. So you can see that our direct contacts with constituencies are dropping over the last few years, and this directly reflects a drop in our staffing levels. .4-H, though, has remained relatively constant in terms of youth engagement in the .4-H program.
Yes, Coach O'Bonner.
Just real quick, there's a pretty significant drop off in volunteers. Is there a reason why there's stake assistant numbers and then dropping continued stake assistant numbers?
Yeah, I stared at that, but I don't have an answer for that. I'm sorry.
Was there an updated, I mean.
There might have been a change in definition of who constitutes a volunteer and what they do. I'm not quite sure what went on there. Yeah.
I'll, real quick on that, similar to that, just by the drop off in the number of county contracts, do you know if there nationally a trend downward in the number of extension employees? I mean, is that becoming an issue with the up and coming generation? Is a lack of interest or anything, or not?
I can't speak to that directly. Indirectly, my observation is that other states are repositioning extension, sometimes down valuing it. Colorado, for example, has moved their extension out of the College of Ag, and the program is run by a sociologist. And other states are readjusting their extension programs, which must reflect pressure within their state. So yes, I think indirectly you might say that there is a downward trend nationally.
And so would that be partly, I mean, the shift toward more regional extension offices rather than more or less every county having one? I mean, consolidation effort.
Right, there may be elements of that. I'm not highly qualified to speak about that, but Kelly is here if you'd like to ask him.
Well,
So.
all right, thank you.
All right.
We'll hold, like I say, we'll hold off on that for now.
All right.
We'll keep rolling. Carry on.
All right.
Are there any other questions? All right.
Okay. So I'll spend a few minutes then to conclude this, talking about some strategic issues in personnel. In the 2019 legislative session, the issue of BSL-3 laboratory staffing came up. We had anticipated this and had budgeted for 2 positions to support the BSL-3 lab in collaboration with Will Agreed, who is director of that laboratory. We obtained comparative staffing numbers from 14 other institutions, and based on that data, we expanded the staffing to a total of 4 new positions. Okay, so they are hiring they have ongoing searches right now for a faculty member and 2 new staff members. They'll add 1 additional faculty member in FY21, and that will bring us to 100% staffing on BSL-3. That laboratory should become functional this next year, at least that's the word on the street. So the staffing should be there at an appropriate time for the operation of this new laboratory. I won't go through in detail, but the legislature appropriated $500,000 toward infrastructure needs in the rodeo program. I think the important thing to notice here, which gets back to the strategic planning issue, is that we've initiated a site analysis at the Laramie R&E Center so that as we build rodeo facilities, they will dovetail with our academic program and our research program out at that R&E Center so that we will have a staged process going forward. So hopefully they will begin, their top priority is animal housing, so that construction should begin in the fall. And then fundraising is underway, and the word from the foundation is that they're having good success in finding match for the $500,000 placed in the Ag Research and Excellence Fund. So here are our numbers for college staffing, 2015 prior to the budget cutbacks versus 2019. So you can see that we've dropped from 96 faculty to 81. Academic professionals are a class of faculty, generally considered to be faculty. Often they're more embedded in the teaching program as opposed to research on average. And then you can see our changes in staff as well. So a total of 57 positions from these three categories are what we're down right now. The problem is that the changes in faculty and staff number were not uniform across the college. There wasn't any strategic reason for this. This is simply structural in how the cuts were managed. So we had three factors playing in here. One was time frame. So in other words, we couldn't spread these cuts out. They had to happen fast. Number two is that the dollars were captured primarily by sweeping positions as people retired or left the university. So you don't have control then over where the holes appear. And the third factor is that we just happen to be at the cusp of a retirement cohort that was large. So this means that in animal science, for example, they lost 9 positions. 4 of those were positions that were being searched for, and we had resumes on campus at the time the cuts were announced. So those 4 positions were all to replace people who had retired at the same time, and those 4 positions were swept. So then there were an additional 5 lost over the subsequent 2 years by sweep. So as part of the interim leadership team, I asked for and received 1 to replace. They also received 3 other positions, so they're down a net of 5. So that's a big hit in a department like animal science. Okay, so the decision was not to go after animal science. It's just structural in how these cuts happen to come about, and they suffered as a result. Okay, that's an example of how stochastic, I hate to use academic chatter, but how chaotic and random the losses were, and this, of course, makes it difficult to manage programs going forward.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead,
Mr.
Representative Boyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess you're talking about it structurally inside the Department of Ag, I'm assuming, and how the cuts were made. But also, how does this relate to other colleges in the university itself?
Right.
Are we percentages close?
Right.
Or is this worse?
No, this is worse. The process that I described, those 3 factors that apply in our college, they apply across the university. Okay? But we suffered more than the average. And one of the reasons is the last point on that slide, which is that we have certain classes of faculty and employees that turn over more. So extension's an example of that. We have a little higher turnover rate than other units on campus. That exposes that position to being swept due to the high turnover rate. So yes, we did suffer more than other colleges, but it's baked into the nature of our college and how it operates.
Follow up, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess that's a big concern, obviously, to this committee. And what can the committee do to maybe send a statement that is pretty blunt to the board?
Well, I think probably the biggest thing is to respond positively to any legislative ask that comes out of the university. I think that would be an acknowledgement of the problem that has arisen. So it's easier for me to be blunt because I'm a short timer, okay? But my look at the budgets and the staffing levels says that the college needs an infusion. And we're not asking for to rebuild the college of old. I don't think we want that kind of operation. I think what we want is something that's a little bit leaner, a little bit more focused, but covers the three legs of the land grant mission. That's really what I'm asking for. Yeah.
Good. Further questions?
I'll just
Go ahead.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess following up, and especially the next slide, when we see the, I mean, if a 17% loss is above average, that 40% loss actually in our communities,
Right.
and is completely unacceptable considering the land grant mission of the university and the
Right.
way we perceive that. I appreciate your explanation is,
Right.
you know, it wasn't necessarily intentional,
Right.
but the way we perceive that is it's almost punishing the legislature for asking for any fiscal austerity at all from the university, which is 100% unacceptable, obviously.
Right.
And so we'll keep that in mind. I appreciate your bluntness.
Right.
But I mean, keep in mind that ultimately, you know, we had that land grant mission. And like I said, I appreciate your explanation. It does make sense. But just understand that the perception is that it may have been that decision to hit the folks outside of Laramie to about 40% is perceived as a politically motivated decision. So that's why we're here, as Representative Larson alluded to. I mean, these few slides are the reason why we're having this topic. I look forward to continuing to work to make sure that a similar circumstance does not happen again. So
Right. Thank you, Senator.
I guess I should have asked a question, but I don't.
You know, actually, that idea hadn't crossed my mind, but in extended conversations with the president and the provost over the last 4 months, I'm not sure it entered their mind either. There was a certain level of panic on campus when it came time to make these cuts, and I don't think that there were a number of unintended consequences of the cuts that were made, driven largely by speed. Good. But yes, then it did impact our outreach mission disproportionately, significantly compared to the rest of the campus. And as you alluded to here, unfortunately, Rangelands is one of our big priorities, and yet we're down 50%. So it needs to be fixed. Yeah.
Yes, Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is a wouldn't you agree question. Just to follow up with Chairman Boners, I thought the land grant mission does not just apply to the College of Ag, it is for the entire university. And so wouldn't you agree?
Not only would I agree, but I've taken concrete steps to broaden our engagement across campus. So that is an issue in the past, is that we've been a little too insular. So we met with our leadership team and the new Office of Engagement. The point of that meeting was that we're the elephant in the living room on campus when it comes to engagement. That's what we do. That's where the bulk of our budget goes. So they needed to understand that. They think they understand what we do, but always in these meetings, they learn something about the breadth and depth of our programs out there. So there's that going on. I think that the site analysis, which was actually out at the Laramie R&E Center, was headed up by Neil Theobald, who was the Vice President for Administration, now the new acting president of the university as of the end of June. And he learned an immense amount about the operation of the Ag College as part of that process. So in a way, I've been running a seminar on the College of Ag over the last 4 months in these kinds of communications, also speaking with the engineering college. So my hope is that we can build on this and bring the college into a position of leadership in these areas. We've been kind of hesitant to do that in our history, but the reality is we bring a lot to the table in these programs, and we have the state in mind for most of our programs as we deliver. That's an explicit part of the hiring decisions that we make, which is very different from other departments and units on campus. So that's my hope. Yeah.
Other questions? Real briefly on all that, I want to give you kind of hopefully a bit of a fallback on this. The issues of the last year or so aside, was there necessarily compared to other colleges, a higher than average retirement rate in the College of Agriculture? I mean, because I know and this is going back a few years, but I know for a fact that from my own time there, that was true of the economics department, and I've been told of the Rangeland department. And so, was that a higher ratio of retirement than any of the other colleges on campus?
Yeah, I can't answer that explicitly right off the top of my head, but in addition to the 4 retirees whose positions were swept in 2015-16, there were 3 out of the range program, and those 3 people taught the undergraduate boots on the ground range management kinds of courses. So Mike Smith, Professor Wagner, those kinds of people. So there's 7 out of the college right there who retired at that time, and all of them had about 30 to 35 years of service. Dan Rogers, he may have had 40 years of service, as far as I know. So there may have been, certainly there was a large cohort internally, were not departures, they were retirements.
And I guess that's why I bring that up, because certainly in the Ag Econ College department, that many of the professors I had 10 years ago were, to my understanding, retired within, I don't know, 2 or 3 years after I was gone. So,
Right.
Anyway. Okay, so moving on. Any other questions, committee? All right.
Okay, we're nearing the end here. This is a reference to the 6 counties that we currently do not have an extension area educator housed in.
Oh, yep. Senator Moniz.
Oh,
Give us a reason why we don't have extension educators in those counties in red.
well, I wasn't around in making decisions as this happened, but I would guess it boiled down to who would we cut within the college in order to fill those positions. So I would guess that was, someone made a decision based on funding priority. So
I guess I'm curious, did it have anything to do with the issue with the paying of the benefits for those extension educators?
I don't think so. You know, those EPBs came to about $260,000 annually, and the budget that has now been baked into the budget, and so I don't think so. I think it's the bigger issue of funding 6 new positions.
Kelly, can we corner Kelly on this and see if we've got an opinion?
You may. Yeah, Kelly, come on up. You looked like you were leaning over pretty far, so.
All the way out of the room almost. So thank you, Chairman Hunt, Senator Moniz. Those decisions weren't made based on the EPB issue or us having to pay the benefits that counties prior paid for 4-H educators. Those open counties are just like Mark stated. As they came open, those positions disappeared. We weren't allowed to refill those positions. So it's mostly people that moved on or retired, and we couldn't fill the positions. With the exception of Sweetwater County, we did advertise that position and have a failed search, but we weren't allowed to go back out for that because then the position freeze happened. So it's emblematic of what has happened. The people moved on. We weren't allowed to fill those positions. So those are counties where we don't have area educators.
Further questions on that issue? Okay. Yes, Representative Clausen.
Mr. Chairman, does that leave some management gaps in your system?
Mr. Chairman, absolutely it does, Representative Clausen. It leaves us open in those counties. We still have 4-H educators, you'll notice. Those are a shared position where we get half of the salary from the counties. From the county commission gives us salaries. So we've been able to hire those all along, even through the freeze, because we had county contribution to support those positions. But we don't have area educators in those, so it creates a challenge for us. As well as coverage, we expect area educators to cover a 5-county area, and so it opens up the geography. If you'll see in western Wyoming, we don't have a range educator in the whole western side of the state because of that that loss of the position in Sublette County.
I hate to belabor this, but I
Go ahead.
This is an area, again, that Senator Boner and actually Senator Steinmetz suggested that this is where the rubber hits the road out in the state of Wyoming. I'm hoping that your administration understands how important this is to the producers in the state of Wyoming as we go forward. And I think it's also important that we as a committee understand how critical this is as we go forward with this process. Wouldn't you agree?
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yes, I agree.
Further questions? No. All right. Then, I mean, yeah, I would say ditto to what the senator said, so, yeah. Any further questions for Kelly, and then we'll go ahead and try and finish this up? Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
So one last slide. This just reviews physical infrastructure issues. They are less critical than the personnel. Largely, lack of lab space in veterinary sciences and animal science. So as we hire in animal science, they're going to need some more space in order to house those people. And the R&E Center in Laramie is the last one to be refreshed around the state. So there are some significant issues. Studies were done in 2014 to determine the cost and needs out there, but lack of funding has delayed that. And finally, fragmentation of molecular biology laboratories. And I would say that the College of Ag will benefit from the science initiative on campus. So we will grab probably sufficient laboratory space out of the new science initiative building to cover much of our needs for laboratory space. So that would be individuals from several departments in Ag being housed there, including molecular biology. So most of our infrastructure needs will be simply refreshing some of the 30 and 40-year-old space and laboratories that we currently have. So that's much less expensive than a new building ask or something like that. So that's the punchline on our infrastructure needs. And that concludes what I have to say.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Senator Moniz.
I don't know if you'd go this far, but I think I heard you say that you're isolating yourself from the science initiative.
Well, not really. So I was just handed the occupancy list for the science initiative building about a week ago. And they are going to accept into that building the 10 research active faculty members out of molecular biology into that building. So that was great news to me because that frees up the eastern wing of the animal science molecular biology building for occupancy by animal science. So that's very important to me as a dean, that space becomes available. So it also moves those people onto central campus where they're going to have closer contact with other life scientists. And it also eliminates the need to pay for redundant equipment in the two spaces they currently occupy. So if we move them into one place, we no longer have to buy all of the scanners and other sorts of equipment that they need day to day. So it'll be a savings for us in operational cost, and it'll be a savings for us in space.
The reason I say that is strategically as we go forward, based on what I've read, there's going to be an additional ask for the science initiative, which was not very well received at our last legislative session. So in your case, I think I hear you saying you have no need. You're going to get your needs filled by the existing infrastructure.
We are.
So I think that's important that statement is out there to the rest of the legislators that that ask is good. It may not be very well received. That's my guess based on our last session.
Right.
So I think it's important that not only we understand, but the rest of the legislature understands that those needs are already met for you as far as infrastructure.
Right. So I'll restate that to make it clear. So the Science Initiative building will be completed, but without a build out of the third floor, I believe it is. So not all the space will be built out. It'll be built out in the future as needs arise. But my understanding is that the 10 faculty out of molecular biology that we moved in there will be moved into the space that is being built out. Okay? So the College of Ag will not be dependent on the success of an additional ask from the science initiative. So that was good news to me. Right, so the ask that we have sent forward to Old Main and that we're hoping goes forward to you does not include any money for the science initiative building or science initiative programs. It's focused completely on the College of Ag.
Further questions? All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the chance to talk to you.
All right. Okay, unless the other two gentlemen, John or Brian, have anything to add to this discussion, thank you guys for the presentation. And committee, it is 10:10. We will take a 10-minute break and we'll be back at 10:20 to take up state lands. So, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. Any public comment? Yes, Mr. McGagnon. No. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim McGagnon with Wyoming Stockholders Association. Just a couple of very brief points. First, I want to make the committee all aware of the fact that for our organization, we've identified rebuilding the College of Agriculture as one of our highest priorities for not just for this year, but over the next several years. We realize it's a multi-year process to do so. We fully endorse the 3 priority areas that the interim dean outlined to you earlier. We think those are the areas where the need is greatest out in the industry and where the college can best integrate with that. And I would particularly emphasize as we go forward the importance of extension and the research centers. And I think that we've suffered for a number of reasons in recent years with the College of Agriculture, and that's behind us now. But one of them certainly is that, as has been pointed out, it's unique with its outreach functions that go beyond those of most of the colleges to university. And I think that was not well understood, particularly by some within the central administration. The other thing we keep reminding ourselves and our members, and I would call to your attention too, that is there are programs and they've been identified that we really need to rebuild within the college. But as we look at rebuilding, I think it's important that we not be thinking of that in terms, we've got to make them look like they did 10 years ago or 20 years ago. The needs in agriculture are changing in how we raise our product and how we treat our resources and how we market our product, et cetera. And the college programs that we need to build today need to reflect what those needs are in the 21st century, not necessarily the fond memories that we all have of what the college was at one point in time. With that, Mr. Chairman, happy to take any questions, but we stand ready to work with this committee and with, I know, a number of other members of the legislature that have expressed strong support for moving forward with the college. We know it can't all be done in 1 year, but as someone who's been very involved both on the executive committee of the Dean's Advisory Committee and on the search committee for the new dean, there's internally within the college, there's a level of enthusiasm, desire, and commitment today that I found lacking over the last several years. And I think it is going to be critically important that working together, we deliver some things to the college in this next legislative session. We know it's not going to be everything, but if we were to fail, I think it really sets us back in a huge way that will be difficult to recover from. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Questions for Jim? Yes, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim, regarding the rebuilding piece, do you see any opportunity here to do more about expanding the internship area and among the members in terms of going forward?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, I think that's a critical part, and I'm not certainly up to in depth on all the details. My understanding is that the college has a strong internship program in many areas. I know we as an organization bring on 1 or 2 interns from the College of Agriculture every summer in our operation. We had until this year a program where we were putting range students out on ranches. And these were students that weren't going to necessarily become ranchers, but they were going to become the people in the BLM or the NRCS or the Forest Service. We wanted them to have seen resource management from the rancher's perspective. Unfortunately, this year we lost the funding for that, but we're right now working on a couple of avenues to restore that. But our experience has been that there are enough internships available to College of Ag students that there's not a huge request out there for internships. So we've had the struggle at some times. In fact, have ended up taking on students from other universities because we didn't have enough applicants from the College of Agriculture. But I'm sure that varies from one area to the other.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, my point really leads to growing the workforce, obviously, but more importantly, creating the environment where we can make sure that there are placements and we are having, students go through our education system and get the real world experience in the field, but get a job and put the roots down and stay in Wyoming.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, I would totally agree. And I think that's one area where we see some change. Perhaps 25, 30 years ago, when we said get a job, we meant get back out on a farm or ranch. That's still critically important. We have a shortage of those people, particularly ranch managers for ranches that are being owned and operated by people who don't necessarily live on and operate the ranch. That's a very fruitful area. But the other part of this is, I think that's equally important. It's as critical to a rancher how they raise their crop or their livestock as to how that is marketed. I mean, the vertical integration within our industry today is something far beyond what we would have visualized 25, 30 years ago. So when we're talking about preparing people for a job, I believe one of the members of the committee mentioned earlier food science, or that, food science is a field that's now become very important to production agriculture, because we have to produce within our sights set on the consumer at the other end, not just set on the entity that's going to take the product off of our hands.
Further questions for Mr. McGagnon? All right, thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hamilton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ken Hamilton with the Wyoming Farm Bureau. Unfortunately, your schedule, when you're behind, all the lobbyists show up and talk, and when you're ahead, we don't say anything. Apologize for that. But I would like to say that I too think that this is a critical thing to look at. The College of Agriculture is important to the agricultural community, but there's been several comments made that I think we need to expand upon. And Senator Steinmetz mentioned that the land grant focus isn't just in agriculture, and that's true. It's not a new issue. I remember, I think President Dubois was trying to expand the extension focus into other colleges, but I don't think that was very successful, and I'm not sure if I could really pinpoint the reason for that. Some of it might have been this silo thing that seems to crop up. I know in the College of Agriculture, the extension service and that outreach has been critical. And some of the things that you worry about is when you start to move those into other colleges, that you do end up losing that agriculture, that extension part that's so critical to agriculture. We talked about some of the goals, and one of the things that I think I really would like to bring to this discussion is the cost of education, because that's critical to our students out there, our future students. I think the university has done a pretty good job. We hear quite a few things that say that the university excels in our programs at a reasonable cost, but I don't think we should forget that. I would agree too with the core values, and I think this is one of the things that we have not seen, and it may be college-wide, and that's that the priorities seem to get set in a little bit of a skewed fashion. Living there in Laramie, I noticed quite a few construction programs going on at the University of Wyoming. We've got some pretty nice facilities that have come into being in the last 10 years. And as a citizen of the state, I think it's a little difficult when the university says, well, we need more funding because we are losing faculty and things like that. And we see that there's been a significant increase in the number of structures there. And so this was a conversation I've had with a previous president is, well, you don't seem to have a clear set of priorities. Are we going to spend our money building buildings? Are we going to spend it on faculty? And we're going to spend it on those things that that we really want to do for the students. So those are some things. It's not just the College of Agriculture. It's university-wide. Issue of new technology is, and I think Representative Henderson brought up the broadband thing. That's something that is pretty critical to the state of Wyoming. Wyoming's got a broadband initiative. We're very appreciative of that. And the major focus of that is to map those areas where we're deficient in broadband. And that's significant because there's a lot of maps that show we have pretty high broadband coverage in Wyoming. But when you get down there to boots on the ground, it isn't there. And it's going to become critical. It's already critical in the cropping area of our industry. If any of you have got one of the newer tractors and you want to fix it, you've got to just about have to, you got to have that broadband connectivity. But it's going to become important too in the remote sensing. We're starting to see a lot of remote sensing in the livestock industry. You've got to get that data from point A to point B. I know there's a lot of efforts going on out there. In fact, I think Microsoft is petitioning the FCC right now to be able to use what they call the white space, that space between our television channels to transmit broadband stuff. A few years ago, I asked our folks, well, what do you think is important in the College of Agriculture? And in fact, I even said, well, is extension, is that something that's no longer critical? Because we've got the internet out there, we've got a vast amount of information. Back when extension was created, it was to get information out to the agricultural community. And I got a good response back, but the youth programs are, I think, was one of the biggest things that are supported by our folks. And I'd like to just mention that youth programs aren't just for agriculture. The 4-H program really reaches out to a lot of those urban people. It does provide a background in agriculture in many instances, but in our urban areas, it provides a pretty good background too. And I don't think that's really conveyed out there to the legislative body and to our citizens. That those youth programs, I think, are really a good program that helps in a lot of ways, something that probably prevents a lot of maybe some of our youth getting into trouble, some of our troubled youth that are getting out of trouble. You mentioned interns. We too have availed ourselves of interns over the year. In fact, our employees at Wyoming Farm Bureau, I think there's only one of them that hasn't been through the College of Agriculture. I apologize to Worry Means was again from hiring one of his individuals away. She left me, by the way, and got married. Montana's gain. Wyoming's lost. There's some topics that we do need in agriculture that I think the university could help us with. We in Wyoming have one of the largest populations of sage grouse. I think that's critical that we get some good information out on that. Feral horses, I don't know whether we'll ever gonna see the end of that problem, but I think we've got, we've got some people out there that are working in other Western states. I think the University of Wyoming can provide some good leadership in that. You saw yesterday on invasive species. I think we've really got a good handle on that, but we need to expand it. Water management. And this gets back to maybe some of these things that I'm a little concerned about. When the College of Agriculture had an ag engineering program. We had some people involved in water management. In fact, some of you may have known Don Brose. He's been retired for quite a while, but we still use some of the information that he had. When that program went over to the College of Engineering, and I can understand why it did, it seemed like the agricultural part of that just slid off the radar. And that's troublesome, and it sort of worries me when we say, well, we're going to use the College of Agriculture is going to use other facilities. I think it's critical we don't lose that focus that we currently need in agriculture. And remote learning is something that's pretty important. Complexities, I think, are the biggest issue. I think you guys have struggled with it. When you look at the university and you look at the process that they go through, you look at the budget, it's pretty difficult for somebody, even in my position, to know which buttons to push when we're having problems. You know, I've been in this, involved in this for quite a while, and we'll hear, well, we got this coming, but it's Old Main. And so you go talk to Old Main and say, well, no, it's something else. And so I think the complexities of this whole structure sort of causes problems when we seek to try and solve these problems. I don't know whether we can overcome those complexities. There seems to be a persistent concern in the ag community that Old Main doesn't understand the ag college. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it's something that I think we have to acknowledge and make sure that we try and figure out which buttons we need to push, who we need to talk to, try and say, okay, look, you know, you're doing you're doing good for us over here, but here's some other issues that we think that we need to have some help on. The third thing or the last thing I want to talk about, when I asked our folks, well, what do you use the extension service to? Almost all of them said, we use it as an unbiased source of information. And that's critical because in today's world, when you have a vast amount of information, and a lot of those people will say, oh, hey, our product is the best. We do rely on our extension folks to say, yeah, that's a good product, but there's other products out there too. And I just want to kind of relate a little interesting thing that happened to me a few years ago. I was at a Farm Bureau meeting, and this lady come up and started talking to me about the benefits of diatomaceous earth. I don't know if any of you ever heard of diatomaceous earth, but diatomaceous earth was one of those things that I'm not sure they didn't sell it out of the back of wagons way back in the early days. And I come back and I was talking to an individual I worked with and said, what's this deal about diatomaceous earth? It says it's dust that they sell and try to advocate that it's a wonderful thing for all kinds of stuff, pesticides, those kinds of things. And yet people were out there saying, oh, well, this must be a good idea. If they'd have talked to their extension agents, they find out that this was more of a snake oil salesman. But I think that's the other part of this, the unbiased information that you can get from the extension people, and that will certainly continue to be, I think, an important part of the College of Agriculture. So, Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I eat up a bunch of your time, but that's all I really have. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Question for Ken. All right, thank you, Ken. Further public comment? Further public comment on this issue? Going once, going twice, public comments closed, and but I do want to say thank you to Ken and to Jim both, and I think that your extensive testimony is, really speaks to the interest and concerns that your organization's constituencies both have, and I think that's. I just want to reiterate, we'll have this discussion again in September. I hope that we can spend effectively a full day on it, because I think that this is very timely that we're taking this up, and the public interest seems to be as high as it's possibly ever been. So anyway, that being said, committee, any other comments before we take a break and move on? Yes, Senator Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I think about this, obviously, I think you heard my theory as to why we're here with the more significant cuts to the College of Agriculture, especially out in our communities. And so when thinking about how we're going to, hopefully prevent such an occurrence from happening in the future, I think that it'd be appropriate for the legislature to monitor, especially the College of Agriculture, and we'll see how the discussion develops. Monitor their budget, make sure that we keep that that attention as commensurate with its land grant status and the role it plays in the land grant university. So I'd move that also drafts a bill that would require the College of Agriculture to report to the Joint Agriculture Committee and the Joint Appropriations Committee on their revenue and expenses annually, no later than October 1st.
Okay. Okay, that motion has been made by Co-Chair Boner, seconded by Representative Clausen. All right. Is there any discussion on that? Okay, if none, all ready for the question. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries. You got that, Josh? Okay. Committee, any further discussion of business on this issue? Yes, Representative Tass.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a comment, as we try to squeeze all the budgets across the state that we deal with, I think maybe the university is being a little more successful in pushing cuts towards the ag college, knowing that that is the one that we are probably, most of us that, there are a lot of us involved in agriculture, are more sympathetic to, and so they're push these requests into the ag department so that across the other colleges, maybe they don't have to address the shortfalls that we're trying to address on the legislature. You see this when I was on the school board, we wanted them to do something with their expenses, and right away they wanted to take away the teacher's salary or cut the teachers instead of addressing some other items that were more dear to them, but that they were trying to protect, where they knew we would protect the teachers. So just a comment, I think it's an unfair of the university to push so much of these cuts into the ag department, knowing that that's probably where we would be more generous. So that's just my comment. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Representative. Further comments, committee? Senator Moniz?
Nope.
All right. All right, it is 10:31. We'll go ahead and take a 9-minute break, and we'll be back here at 10:40. We do need to get rolling, so be back in 9. You. We respect our elders. We'll give the senators a moment. They didn't catch that. What's that? Yeah. Okay, we're getting back together here. So, next up on the agenda is state land. So, folks, take it away.
Susan Child, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Office of State Lands and Investments. Director Scoggins sends her regrets. She is at OGCC today, presiding there. They did not have a quorum. She would have been here otherwise. So one more time, you get me, and then I'm done. Okay, Mr. Chairman, we did provide you with a lot of information. A lot of it has been provided to you before, and it was intended to be more background type information to get everybody up to speed. I know there are some new members on the committee, and if you would indulge me, the one that we brought today is this one, and it's more like, it's our State Lands 101. It was also part of the presentation that Senator Boner asked us to provide the Senate Ag in January. So the senators should have that information. However, I wanted to include the representatives as well. I'm not going to go through it page by page because I know we are behind. But the one thing that a couple of things I'd like to point out, it would be on slide number 5, is that the board is constitutionally charged with optimizing revenue of state trust lands to support public education and beneficiary institutions while concurrently striving to protect, conserve, and maintain the lands so they may be used for future generations. And then also Wyoming Statute 362107, little a, which is kind of our Bible. The board shall have the power and authority to promulgate and adopt rules and regulations not inconsistent with the laws of the state as it may from time to time deem necessary in the direction, control, disposition, and care of the state lands. So, and then if you go to slide number 6, the statutory principles, I've been here long enough so I remember this. Those were established by virtue of the 1996 Legislative Task Force that looked at our agency. If you all recall, way back when, there was a moratorium on the sale of state trust lands. This task force came in, looked at our agency, and those principles that are laid out right there are the ones that task force, by virtue of session laws 1997, Wyoming Session Laws, Chapter 200, Section 3A, little I. Those are the ones that kind of started this whole ball rolling where we look very closely at what we do to maintain what we have. And then on slide 7, the trust land management objectives, those were adopted by the Board of Land Commissioners on August 10th of 2005 as a consolidated and prioritized statement of the criteria to share with our transaction proponents as well as the public. So they would be aware of the relevant information that we need for an analysis of any given transaction to build confidence, consistency, and objectivity into our evaluation process. Again, those trust land management objectives came about after the 2005 Legislative Executive Task Force that looked at our agency with a fine-tooth comb and went through each and every program that we handle in our agency. So, and then if you look at slide 10, that is just a list of all the beneficiaries. Granted, 86% of the lands that we manage are managed for the benefit of the common school. However, there are other beneficiaries as well. And I think I just wanted to provide that for your enjoyment. So if you ever need State Lands 101, it's
Okay.
kind of right there in that little handout.
All right.
Okay?
Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I believe the first topic is a voluntary land exchange program. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. This was brought to us to provide an expedited process to allow landowners to propose transactions that would exchange parcels of state trust land completely isolated and surrounded by their ownership for parcels with public and legal access via public road easement. The discussion points, I believe this, I believe it was a senator, asked us to come up with some discussion points on this. And so what would be important to us, it would be that the proposals would still be analyzed in accordance with our trust land management objectives. Those were the 5 that I had set out earlier. And those proposals would then be processed through and in accordance with Wyoming statutes and all applicable rules and regulations of the Board of Land Commissioners. And the Office of State Lands and Investments would provide a non-negotiated broker's price opinion, which I had to look this up because Jason told me what it was. A broker's price opinion is a report that is performed by a licensed real estate agent, broker, or appraiser. It is similar to doing a comparative market analysis, but most of the time it's done by a real estate professional. So if we did that, it would cut the time necessary. So any denial would not preclude the proponent from entering into a full appraisal process. In the event, this would just shorten up the time rather than going through a whole full-blown appraisal. The proponent's costs are decreased by not hiring an appraiser, and the time is shortened by not completing an appraisal. The public comment period could be shortened to 30 days. And notification of the proposal would be sent to the county commissioners prior to a final detailed analysis to seek request for the need of a public hearing. If a public hearing is not requested by the county commissioners, we would not perform one. So the maps that we provided, there is a map that was attached to that, and it shows the state lands with no known public access. And those little red dots on this map are completely surrounded by private land or, well, it would be private land, all private land. So those are the parcels that you would be looking at.
Hey.
Sure.
Yeah. Coach O'Bonnell.
Could you just tell us roughly the acreage involved with that's not publicly accessible?
Absolutely. Mr. Chairman, we have we manage approximately 3.6 million acres, and 2.5 million acres of that is legally accessible. And so that is 70% of our land, 70% of the state trust lands are accessible. 140,000 acres are restricted by that, or 5.6%. And by that, we mean they're restricted for, if you look at this little handout here. Where is that? It's restricted because, oh, that's when we get into the other, there's too much information here. Where has that been?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I apologize. I realized I looked in further in the slides, and that's actually later in the presentation. So by all
Yes,
means,
there is
yeah,
a slide later in the presentation. It's blue. Oh, there it is. So a majority of those restricted lands are walk-in areas, or they could be roads, or there is a slide presentation that was given. earlier. This is another piece of information that had been given to you. Okay, the restrictions usually include walking areas, roads and shooting, or they've been close to shooting, and those are examples of why we would restrict those. And those are all I mean, we just don't willy-nilly restrict those lands. It goes through a process, and the board takes it under consideration. We investigate, we prepare our analysis, we provide it to the board for their consideration, and then the board makes their recommendation, and hence their forward.
Briefly, how is a particular location like brought to the board? I mean, who brings that forward and says, hey, I think this section or whatever needs to be, have restricted access to it?
Mr. Chairman, it is we're either notified by someone from the public, or we do it through our own investigation, when our field people are out there. If they notice that, there's been mud bogging or trash dumping, those investigations are brought to the board. They analyze it, and then it goes through the process, and we determine if it requires a restriction or not. And Mr. Chairman, by the way, 1.1 million acres are inaccessible. So those would be all the little red dots on that map. So, Mr. Chairman, we would entertain any questions. I'm not on the voluntary land exchange program, but those are the comments that we would provide.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, Representative Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess I'm a little confused, but 140,000 acres are restricted. 5.6% of accessible lands. The 140,000 acres that are restricted, that is restricted from the Office of State Lands and Investment, or restricted by the private landowner that surrounds that state land?
Mr. Chairman, those lands are restricted by our office.
Okay.
We have closed them for one reason or another.
Okay. Follow up?
Yep, go ahead.
Are there state lands that are surrounded by private lands that are inaccessible because the private landowner is restricting access to those state lands?
Mr. Chairman, there may be, but there shouldn't be. They should not be doing that unless it is ag land. If it is, cropland.
Follow up,
Okay.
go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'll yield to Ben Bumpy as Assistant Director for our Field Services Division. So he can probably answer that question better than I.
Ben,
Mr.
go
Chairman.
ahead. Absolutely.
Representative Blake, just to provide some clarity here, we've got for the voluntary land exchange program topic, this is meant to illustrate the accessible versus inaccessible lands, and that's what Susan was talking about with the total of 3.5 million acres, with 2.5 of that being accessible. So you have 1.1 million acres that are inaccessible because they are surrounded 100% by private land. And so in all of those cases, it's the prerogative of the private landowner to provide access or not, and we don't have that information on those. The restrictions portion of this was just to speak to some of the other lands that are additionally restricted, not related to that access, legal access. And so what this 140,000 acres is, those are the acreages that are affected by board restrictions. The State Board of Land Commissioners has restricted those for one reason or another. That totals to 5.6% of the accessible lands. The vast majority of those are collaboration with the Wyoming Game and Fish Department for walk-in areas. So they are open to all walk-in uses, hunting, fishing, etc. The only restriction that they have is that vehicles are not allowed. So to It's a little bit misleading to think that 140,000 acres of accessible state trust lands are totally restricted. They're slightly restricted.
Okay. Follow up?
I'll think about it here. Thank you.
Any
Mr.
further
Chairman.
questions? Yes, Representative.
If I could, I misunderstood your question. I thought you asked if a state lessee was restricting access to state land. I'm sorry,
Oh, no problem.
my
Thank you.
mistake.
Representative Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of the 1.1 million acres that is inaccessible, which you've shown us the map here, surrounded by private property, you have a volunteer land exchange program that you would be willing to take one of these red dots and exchange it for another piece of property that does have access that would benefit both parties, correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Mr. Chairman, so I understand the Forest Service and the BLM have similar programs that they do the same thing. They will swap to private entities for the beneficial use of both parties. But I understand we've never been able to do a swap between the state of Wyoming and the U.S. government. Could someone explain to me is there a law there that prohibits that? Why can you deal with land exchanges with private entities but not another government?
Mr. Chairman, if I understand your question is why we as the state don't entertain an exchange or actually complete an exchange with the federal government, is that correct? Mr. Chairman, I think it's further back in here. And it's in the background information. When we embarked on the very first transaction with the Grand Teton, that was supposed to have been an exchange. We entered it, we signed the agreements, we got approval from the legislature. And when we were moving forward, their timing everything that they have to do, which is in their rules and regulations, anytime, if you look at their federal land exchange handbook, it's like this thick, and it has all kinds of rules and regulations in which they need to comply with, and it just takes time. And they have to be, I guess a lot of times they're not it's not a priority for them, and I don't mean that in a bad way, because they have the same issues that we do. We have a lot of work to do, limited number of people, and it is a long process in which to entertain an exchange with the federal government. But this voluntary land exchange program that we're discussing here, we're cutting some of those timelines. The federal land agencies, they would have to do NEPA on it, and we all know how long NEPA takes to do. I mean, we're working on the Rock Springs RMP. I've been working on that for 8 years. I thought I'd have that done by the time I left, and it's not happening.
Follow up, go ahead.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it's the bureaucratic process on the federal government side that seems to be a hamper. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to, I've been involved in one of those Forest Service swaps with private lands, and it does take a lot of effort. But boy, you would think that for the benefit of the state of Wyoming, the benefit of the government, federal government, that would be able to pick 10 very, very obvious land swaps that would really, really benefit both parties, and do a task force and just push it forward and see if we could just get one done just to blaze the trail. But maybe you're telling me it's just bureaucratically just so time consuming, it's just not worth it.
Mr. Chairman, if I could respond, I think it's very much well worth doing. I mean, but it does take time. And if we had the support to push it through, someone always on their heels pushing it through, I believe it can be done. It just takes time. And the NEPA process does take an extraordinary amount of time to do. And I believe that federal agencies also have, a kind of a streamlined program with landowners for those types of exchanges that they do, if it meets certain criteria. I think it's a little shorter. The process is a little shorter and maybe a little easier. But nonetheless, by the time you follow all the rules and regulations, you go through all the appraisals, you do all the checklists, you do the back and forth, all the memorandums of understanding, the agreement to initiate, and all, it takes time.
Co-Chairman Boner.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on that is a later agenda item. So astute questions from Representative Simpson, but I can't tell you why it hasn't happened in Wyoming. I know in Utah, they've affected several exchanges. They've been able to raise $140 million for their public education system. That's absolutely something that we're going to be looking at on this committee. But as you said, you just need somebody who's going to actually push it through. And you, quite frankly, literally need an act of Congress to affect one of these exchanges sometime due to the issues that Ms. Childs referred to. So that's something we're all going to be working on over the interim. And so we'll definitely be able to tackle that after lunch. But yeah, it's absolutely something on our agenda, given the difficulties in funding K through 12, especially.
Committee, further questions? Okay.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I will hand it over to Ben Bump, the Assistant Director of our Field Services Division, and Dave Bartlett, who is a certified general appraiser in Ben's shop, to go through the appraisal process, the land appraisal process.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, that is if you're concluded with the first topic.
I believe we are. Committee, are there any further questions on the voluntary land exchange? Okay. All right. We'll move forward. Thank you. My apologies. I keep forgetting that. Before we go there, any public comment on that first topic? On voluntary land exchange? Going once, going twice, public comment closed. Okay, now moving on.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Senator Bonner.
I'd like, in looking at the statutes here, it seems like we're talking about a private exchange with state lands. It's very simple, straightforward. And I'm looking at 36-1-107. It says the state of Wyoming is authorized to exchange state-owned lands for privately owned lands. So there's already the statutory authority in general, and that's the entire. I mean, it's one sentence, which, if I understand correctly, it's because of the constitutional nature of the requirement of state lands to raise revenue for public benefits. The statutes are relatively thin, and a lot is accomplished through rulemaking. So when thinking on this topic about what we should do, I think it'd be a relatively straightforward draft bill. That's what the committee wants to do, just to allow specifically authorizing an accelerated program, if you think that'd be the appropriate language. If state lands believes that'd be the appropriate language, and I can't imagine it being more than a few words added to that sentence. So anyways, Mr. Chairman, I guess I'll go ahead and make a motion that we also draft a bill to add provisions specifically for a accelerated swap process between state-owned and privately owned lands to facilitate public access. That's the motion.
Okay, that's the motion. Seconded by, made by Senator Boner, seconded by Representative Henderson. Any discussion on that, committee? Discussion, Josh, you got that? Okay. All right, yes. Okay. Go ahead and repeat that.
Okay, just to draft a bill that would allow for an accelerated program for a exchange of state and private lands to facilitate public access to state lands.
All right. Everybody clear on that?
And Mr. Sorry, a voluntary exchange. Obviously, it should be implicit, but that's what we're talking about. Yeah.
All right. Any further discussion on that? Before we vote, any public comment? Going once and going twice, closed. All right, committee, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
Okay, motion carries. All right, we're good. All right, if there's no further business on voluntary land exchange, we now will move on to continue it to the appraisal process. So, Mr. Bump, all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Ben Bump. I'm the Assistant Director at the Office of State Lands and Investments. Joining us here on the table is Mr. Dave Bartlett, who's one of our certified general appraisers at the State Land Office. Our objective here with this presentation is to provide you with some general background information on appraisal, how it applies to the Office of State Lands and Investments, and then dig into our appraisal process as it relates to land exchanges. At the end, we have a section to discuss briefly valuation in greater depth if it's desired and if time allows. And so I'll go ahead and proceed into the slideshow that starts with the land appraisal process interim topic. So when we talk about appraisal and standards of appraisal, we're talking about the uniform standards of professional appraisal practice, which is called USPAP for short. The USPAP standards were developed in the 1980s by a joint committee representing all of the appraisal interests in the US and Canada. And it was really a response to the savings and loan crisis and the farm crises in the 1980s that brought the field of appraisal into question in public opinion. The US Congress authorized the appraisal subcommittee, which oversees the Appraisal Foundation and its boards. USPAP standards are required for any federal program within the United States, and they're also adopted by 35 US states and territories. The USPAP standards are updated every 2 years to stay current, and the current version is always available at theappraisalfoundation.org. USPAP standards are not a law in itself, but they are enforced by laws, regulations, and agreements as to whether or not an appraiser has to follow the USPAP guidelines. And in Wyoming, that's the Certified Real Estate Appraisal Act, which requires the USPAP standards to be followed. So the Certified Real Estate Appraisal Act did a few things. It established the appraisal board, which in Wyoming governs and provides the rules for the field of appraisal. It also requires that each certified real estate appraisal issued a permit to practice under this act shall comply with the standards of professional appraisal practice and ethical rules specified by USPAP. Additionally, that act created several classes of appraisal permits, residential and general being the two main different ones. To note, general certified appraisers are the only appraisers authorized to appraise land. So to briefly jump into what USPAP is, it's a set of rules and a set of standards. And a few rules, just to point out the top rule there, that appraiser must act competently and in a manner that is independent, impartial, and objective. That's supported by a handful of different rules, including an ethics rule, a record-keeping rule, competency rule, scope of work, and a jurisdictional exception rule to support that. There's 10 total standards in USPAP. The first four are really the ones that are related to the field of land appraisal. Standard number 1 discusses the development of an appraisal. And specifically, it provides the framework necessary to produce a credible appraisal report. Several of the pieces there are employing the recognized methods and techniques, identifying the value of the definition of value, and reconciling all of the various methods of appraisal within that appraisal development. The second standard is related to the reporting of the findings of that appraisal, and in general speaks to creating a conclusion of value, a conclusion of that report that is not misleading, provides the definitions of what an appraisal report must contain. Standards 3 and 4 are related to review appraisal. So this is the work of a review appraiser reviewing another appraiser's work to ensure that it has complied with USPAP guidelines and other applicable letters of instruction or requirements. So USPAP and the concept of market value appraisals relates to the Office of State Lands and Investments in a few different ways. In Wyoming statute, the Board of Land Commissioners is authorized to promulgate such orders, rules, and regulations that may be necessary or required relative to the appraisal and valuation of lands to be exchanged. Additionally, with the sale or the disposal of lands, it requires that the Board of Land Commissioners duly appraise that land, and it shall not be sold at less than the appraised value thereof. A couple other pieces of guidance that speak to market value for the Office of State Lands and Investments are Board of Land Commissioners rules for several different programs. The farm loans program, that Chapter 7 of the SLIB rules require that the land being mortgaged as security for a loan reflects the current market value. When dealing with easements, that easement payments, while negotiated, will not be granted for less than a market value. In special use leasing, that the minimum annual rental shall be based on fair market value. And finally, that in land transactions, Chapter 26 of the Board of Land Commissioners rules requires that a market value appraisal and a full detailed analysis be completed. Additionally, those same rules require a public comment process, a public comment period, and a public hearing for those land transactions. So now I'd like to walk you through briefly through the land exchange process and then the appraisal process as it relates to that. So you've got a couple of flow charts here, and I'd like to start with the first one, titled exchange process, just to give you a background of how the exchange process in general works. And then we'll dive a little bit more into the specifics of the appraisal process. So in the exchange process, with our office, with our Trust Land Management Division, a proposal is submitted. Anytime a proposal is submitted, it goes to what we call our Category 1 internal review team. That consists of several different members of staff from different sections of our office. If the merits of that transaction are found to be good, it's moved forward for the director's review in what we call Category 2. If the director concurs, then a very brief preliminary detailed analysis is completed. And that is presented to the Board of Land Commissioners in a closed executive session. If the board concurs with that, then it goes to an open public meeting, the next open public meeting of the Board of Land Commissioners, to be presented in that public session. If that is then approved, then the board issues a resolution authorizing the office to enter into an agreement to initiate an exchange. At which point in time, the office and the proponent of the exchange get together and negotiate the various pieces of the exchange, how it will proceed forward, the details of the appraisal process, and so on. We've got the appraisal process that I'll dive into, but just to put a bow on it here, once the appraisal process and the detailed analysis is complete, all of that is published out to the public, and it goes into our public process. In which there are public hearings, a written public comment period. All of that information then goes to a final board decision in an open meeting of the Board of Land Commissioners to finally approve that, and then it moves into a standard real estate closing. So to back up into the details of that real estate process, and on your second flow chart there, if we go to the point of the agreement to initiate the exchange, what generally happens is that the proponent provides the appraiser for the exchange. This is generally so that they bear the cost of it. Alternatively, and in very few situations, the Office of State Lands will provide the appraiser, generally due to timing considerations. Appraisers are generally scheduled very far out. We are lucky enough to have 2 on staff, and so if timing is a consideration, the proponent and the office can agree to that alternative of state lands of providing the appraisals. At that point in time, Office of State Lands will issue a letter of instruction to the appraiser. There's a sample attached here immediately following your this slide deck. And in that letter of instruction, it instructs the appraiser to generally follow the rules of USPAP. It defines what that market value is, specifies the definition of market value, rather, outlines any extraordinary assumptions or hypothetical conditions, and then instructs the appraiser to provide a draft report to OSLI to begin the review process. Alternatively, if field services appraisers are doing the appraisal, then we provide that draft preliminary version to the proponent's review appraiser to begin the review process. And so there on the right side of that flow chart, you'll see what occurs generally in a review process. And so that review appraiser, whether it's the proponents or the offices, will review generally for compliance with USPAP and compliance with the letter of instruction. During that review, if any issues are discovered or more explanation or clarification is needed, the review appraiser will contact the original appraiser and have a back and forth to ensure that those areas of compliance can be reconciled. Once that process is completed and a reviewer has noted the corrections taken, they will file and sign a report stating their findings and the corrective actions taken. And then the appraisal will go back to the appraiser to finalize and sign a final attestment that their appraisal complies with the USPAP, complies with the letter of instruction, and it's at that point that a final opinion of value is formed and signed off on. At that point in the process, to continue, the proponent would sign an acceptance of the appraised value. So if that appraisal process concluded and the proponent did not want to move forward, they would not sign that acceptance of the appraisal, and further steps would have to be negotiated. But when that appraisal is accepted, that moves back into the trust land management division, where a complete detailed analysis is done to look at revenues, values, et cetera. And then it goes back into that public process, back on the first page there, public hearings, written public comment, and to a final board decision. So at that point, I'd like to pause there and see if there's any questions on the exchange process and the appraisal process.
Is there an appeal process? Once the appraisal is determined, does the landowner have is there an appeal process if the landowner doesn't agree with the appraisal?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Moniz, if an appraisal were completed and that proponent did not agree with that appraisal, then they would not sign the acceptance of appraisal, and that process would stop.
I have a number of constituents, Mr. Chairman, with issues about this whole exchange process and the appraisal process, and there appears to be some conflict between what the state appraises their land value at, as opposed to what the proponent's appraised value is at. And the question then comes as to how do you mitigate these differences between the two? I understand where the state's position is, but we have landowners with the same issue. And why I bring this up is you're heavily involved in this whole deal between Laramie and all of that land exchange that's going on up there. We have a number of constituents who are concerned about how that process goes. And in previous meetings we've had explained to us that there's this art of appraisal that was brought out. We're not really sure what the art of appraisal means in that statement, but what's the recourse in that whole process for a landowner in an exchange? Is there any?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Moniz, so with the appraisal process, the appraiser sets out to solve a problem. They gather market data and they look at comparable sales, possibly, and they compile all of this data for the end product of forming an opinion of value. the role of the review appraiser exists to ensure compliance with USPAP, but also ensure that that appraiser has looked at the entire market, has looked at all of the relative market data, and hasn't left anything out when they've come to that value of conclusion. And so it's why the review process is so important, because on either side of an appraisal, you have appraisers and then you have review appraisers. And so that process is important to ensure that all of these things conclude with an opinion of value that is credible and defensible. And so if that process is followed, then the proponents of review appraiser or the proponents appraisal will have all of that opportunity to make those comments, how the process was followed and how that opinion of value was come to. And so if you get to that point where an appraisal is final and a value is final, only at that point does the appraiser sign off on it. And only at that point do you have a fully formed opinion of value. At that point, if that has happened and that appraisal has been signed off on, the recourse would be to not accept, to not sign that acceptance. And that would halt that portion of the exchange, and it would have to move back into negotiating additional steps. That could be seeking additional third-party appraisers or other appraisers to reappraise or reevaluate.
For now.
Okay, Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Letter of instruction, who does that and kind of how does that work?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, the letter of instruction comes from our office during an exchange, and it lays out the requirements that the appraiser should follow. Generally, it's just reaffirming that appraiser needs to be certified, needs to follow USPAP, needs to follow the definition of market value that's laid out, and then it provides additional instructions on how to proceed forward with the review process. And so that's something that's issued from our agency to the appraiser that's doing the appraisal work. As I mentioned before, the vast majority of time, that is the proponent's appraiser that we're sending out letter of instructions.
Any further questions on this section? Hey, I'm sure every case is different, but on average, how long does this process take?
Mr. Chairman, the process can be very extensive. It depends upon the details of the land exchange. Some very small 40-acre, 100-acre land exchanges can go much quicker because that appraisal can be done quicker. The more extensive, larger exchanges require a lot more data gathering, require a lot more time to fully appraise every parcel in that exchange.
All right. Okay, thank you. Continue, please.
Very good. So that concludes the exchange process. As I mentioned before, we've got a couple of slides, and I've got David Bartlett here if time allows, and if you're interested to hear a little bit more about the specifics of data gathering and valuation approaches.
Yes. Great. Please, anything you'd like to add, Bartlett? Nope, not yet.
I've been asked to talk about the appraisal valuation process. And it's on your slide there on the bottom of the page. You know, there's several things that go on here. We look at what the best use of that property might be. We look at market area, market trends. And in Wyoming, as you well know, we are at the mercy of the national economy. When consumer confidence is high, we see people coming to Wyoming to buy recreational ranches. We see people coming when oil and gas is lucrative to do some drilling, and all those generate dollars for Wyoming. So we look at kind of a broad scope of what's happening in the state. To back up to about 2008, when the national economy tanked, we virtually had almost no sales within the state of Wyoming from about 2008 to about 2012. Then we saw some sales occur again, and as you recall, that was about when the national economy began to churn and get better, more job growth. So we are tied to the national economy. And so when we look at some of these market trends, it's not just in Wyoming. It has to do with what people are doing that are coming to our state. When we look at highest and best use, again, Wyoming has a lot of recreation dollars, as you're aware. We do have a very active fish and game that track ungulate migration and where the elk populations are. Many of our buyers in the state look at that. And so, again, that is considered in the highest and best use of some of these properties. The state of Wyoming does have some very high quality properties throughout the state. We also have some red desert properties that maybe are not as high quality. So we have a variety of the spectrum. So in a nutshell, that's how we gather the data. Then we move into our approaches to value. Many of you that have had appraisals done, you've seen the income approach, the cost approach, the sales comparison approach. Income approach is generally taking income for a property, dividing it by some type of rate, whether it be your investment yield rate or some market generated capitalization rate, and coming up with a value. Some of those are market generated, some of them are investment rates that we might look at, but that is one of the processes that are used. We don't typically use the cost approach much with Office of State Lands, mainly because we rarely deal with properties that have improvements, and normally with the cost approach, you would have some type of building improvement where you would figure out what the cost new would be, and then if there's any depreciation, you come up with some type of value. Then you would add that to your core land cost. We don't typically use the cost approach much. Once all these approaches are done, we reconcile, we say, okay, where's the best data? Some kind of outcome. In some of the situations that we see, we might see landowners who say, live in an area and they buy a piece of property that's not market exposed. So for example, say Representative Henderson has a ranch and the neighbor comes to him and says, hey, my father just died. I'd like to sell this land to you. Representative Henderson said, yep, let's do it. $500. Is there any market exposure? No, there's not. But they do the transaction. Fast forward a couple years, and all of a sudden, maybe we're in a land exchange and Senator Henderson says, well, I just paid $500 for this piece of ground. Well, is that market exposed? No, it wasn't. How does that equate to what we do with Office of State Lands? Well, we attempt to find market sales that are exposed, that are market generated. So in that example of Representative Henderson selling or buying at $500 an acre, that's not considered a market sale. Now, if there were other sales in the area that may be at $500 that would suggest that was a market sale, then yes. So we're always in the market looking at sales as a state. And as you know, Wyoming is a non-disclosure state. It proposes, it actually has more challenges in finding sales data. So you have to have systems in place to get that sales data, and it does cause some obstacles. So that is something that takes a lot of time in the state of Wyoming. If you ever hire an appraiser, 90% of their time is in gathering sales data. Finally, what do we use to write our reports? Right now, we subscribe to a off-the-shelf appraisal software program. It's built in South Dakota. It's a standard that Farm Credit uses nationally. We use it. We write sales on it. And so we use that format just because it's automated. We can put it in a database and have it handy. It also has a review function. So if we're doing review appraisals, which we do a lot of, we can write our review comments up and have a nice, neat, tidy report. As far as narrative reports, you will see some appraisers that write a long narrative in, say, Microsoft Word or some other software program. Those are more time consuming to do, and we try to be as efficient as possible, so that's why we use these off-the-shelf programs. Reviews, Mr. Bump did mention that USPAP is kind of the standard, and that did come out of the financial crisis in the 80s. It was needed to have kind of a concise guideline for appraisals to be written to, and so we adhere to that. When we review appraisals, we also adhere to that, and those are updated every 2 years, so we would have new changes that we would incorporate every 2 years into our review process. At this point, Mr. Chairman, are there questions?
Committee, any questions? Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes our portion on the appraisal process. I would just draw your attention to one handout that's at the end after our sample letter of instruction. It's a handout on the land transaction program, and that just provides some general information, some of the stats on what that program has done and completed in the past 13 years or so for your interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee, any questions on this section? Yes, Representative Clausen.
Mr. Chairman, so I assume the person wanting to do the exchange has their own appraiser and you have to accept their appraisal process as well, or does this appraise both sides, both properties?
Mr. Bump.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, either way the answer would be yes. So if the proponent is providing the appraiser, then our office would be providing the review appraiser. If we were providing the initial appraiser, then the proponent would provide the review appraiser. Did that answer your question?
Follow up, please.
Follow up, go ahead.
And if there's a difference, you have a process to mediate the numbers between the review appraiser and the appraiser, or you just don't accept and everybody goes back to the table?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, so that would be the review process where the appraisers would actually get together and speak with each other about their differing opinions prior to issuing a signed review and then ultimately a signed appraisal with that opinion of value.
Good. Anyone else? Yes, Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I want to back up on the appraisal and the what was stated as challenges. So the appraisers have access to all the MLS data on the sale. So I'm just wondering if there's some other challenge here that we need to break through on a barrier. Because if an appraiser, for instance, in the state's interest says, well, we know that these properties sold for X amount of dollars, but we can't disclose it and publish it on something that's gonna be public. Is there some kind of challenge that we need to break through to make sure you guys have the accurate data in your hands, but maybe can redact it? In case, so in other words, I want to make sure you get accurate data from those land sales around you on a particular property.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Bouchard, thank you for the question.
You bet.
I'd like to say a couple things on that. On multiple listing service, your MLS, those sales, when it comes to land transactions, are not very effective because only about 25% of land transactions go through MLS. So that appraiser has to have other avenues to gather data. And like I said earlier, it's a constant process. So if that review appraiser in our case, or the original appraiser that did the work, if there's some differences there, hopefully they would be discussing sales in the draft situation. so that they could iron out some of those differences. One of the issues that we do run into occasionally is, when we look at a property, we will do a canvas of that entire area of things that have gone of public record. And we'll try to contact those landowners to find out, the specifics on that particular sale. So we try to do our best as far as gathering data. And we do use MLS. We definitely do. But it's not necessarily the the crown jewel of finding data in Wyoming. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, that just brings us to another question. So when you, obviously there is a lot of MLS data on land because there's so much going in ranch lands that are being sold that way. But to come back to what you said, there's certainly county data that is also barred from disclosure. So again, is there something that we can do in this case to help you get that data? Because I mean, if there's a land transfer, there was a recorded exchange and obviously a tax payment, and that's hidden from disclosure. So there would be maybe another avenue that you need some help.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, Senator Bichard, thank you. There are things that can happen. There have been bills introduced in past years to make Wyoming a disclosure state. Those have never passed. But if Wyoming was a disclosure state like some of our neighboring states, it would make sales gathering more simple, less complicated. In Wyoming, what we do now is if there is a public transaction, we do know about it because it's gone a public record. We can capture the deed. And in order to find out information, if you've sold a property, that appraiser may call you and say, could you share with me some of your information? Now, not every landowner is going to share that information, but so in terms of helping the process, one thing would be disclosure of sales so that they were public. That would help in the process so that every sale that went down was disclosed. Now, in states where there is disclosure, it's not always a perfect environment either because some of those sales are written down incorrectly for taxation purposes or whatever it might be. The way they allocate a sale might be different. So again, we try to verify the sale, see exactly what happened and why. So I hope, does that answer your question?
Go ahead.
Yeah, one more follow-up. Well, I'm not advocating disclosure because there is a whole side out there that says, hey, that's our business. But what I'm saying is there are certain documents that are withheld from disclosure within the county level. And I mean, I'm all for giving a tool because this is the state's interest of doing a land exchange. And I obviously need the best tools available. So I would just like to see if there are direct challenges in those county reporting systems that you have to do and then maybe report back to the committees. If there's, because I mean, there are going to be specifics there. I think we're having a little bit of a communication issue here.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, Senator Bichard, I know there's a Department of Revenue does have a disclosure statement that is filed with the county and then it goes with the Department of Revenue. We do not have access to those. No certified appraisers do have access to those unless, there's something unusual going on. We have checked with the Department of Revenue to gather some of that information, but at this point, it's not something that's shared.
One more, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think that, and that's what I was trying to get at right there, because see, we don't really want appraisers to say, here's carte blanche, here's the data, because we don't want the data to get out there and be disclosed when we have an anti-disclosure law. But what I am suggesting here is when we're doing a land swap that's in the best interest of the people, that maybe we have some barriers that we can get over, and then and at the same time, your office would have to keep it disclosed within your office, if that makes sense. So it would be a good value to look at those kind of solutions to help you.
Thank you. Committee for the question, yes, Co-Chair Bonner.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So looking through the statutes here, it looks like there's an opportunity for matters before the board. If somebody's not happy with the decision of the Board of Land Commissioners, they can appeal that potentially to the district court or ask that be appealed. Can you go through that process and how that works? If anybody's familiar with it, maybe it doesn't happen too often.
Mr. Chairman, what statute is that under? What is the heading?
36-2, it's appeals under Title 36.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, that may apply to, I don't think that applies to our appraisal process. I believe it applies to other issues that come before the board that, that in the event they don't agree, it could go to court.
Right.
But I don't think it applies directly to the appraisal process.
Right.
Not so much.
Yeah. That's what I was hoping to understand. Thank you. And that's, it seems like we've had some questions regarding, a question of what happens when the appraisers do not agree. It seems like there's an opportunity to adjudicate that through a third party when it gets before the board, but nothing that can alleviate those concerns at the beginning of the process. And so I just want, just leveraging what's already, in statutes and in procedures, we look to resolve this, this issue if that's the desire of the committee, and allow for the opportunity for some sort of appeal or some sort of third party opinion. Like I said, the issues at the beginning of the process before it gets to the board. So I just want to make sure I understood what's currently in statute and how that works. I mean, anything that, any information you might have as to how that works, has worked in practicality, if it's used that often, that'd be all useful information.
Go ahead. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, I would just look back at the appraisal process, and I apologize if I'm being repetitive, but at the point in which the final opinion of value has come wouldn't be until the end of when that appraisal is signed off on. Prior to that, you would be working inside the bounds of USPAP, and the objectivity and partiality is of the utmost importance. Once that value is completed, if not agreed upon, at that point in time, the proponent wouldn't sign the acceptance, and it would not make it to the board. If the proponent did sign that acceptance and it made it to the board, there would be the public process and that board open meeting to bring up those objections, just as to reiterate that information. Thank you.
So if I understand it correctly, they can agree to a value that they don't agree on and then say that later, actually, we don't agree when it gets to the board. Is that the process they could use to move forward? And do you think that'd be a convincing argument to say we signed our name to agreeing to this appraisal, but actually we don't agree, we just want to talk to you, Board of Land Commissioners? I mean, is that a way forward you're saying that that's possible?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, no, I don't think that would actually ever happen.
Right.
I believe that proponent would absolutely not sign off on that acceptance of the appraisal, and they'd have to renegotiate, and that's how we would see that happening.
Okay, so instead, I mean, I'm just looking at the statute that currently allow a appeal to the district court. Do you think if we're talking about this initial disagreement, would be better to have an avenue for appealing directly to the board? If there's an initial disagreement, there's just no way the different appraisers are going to sign the agreement?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, I think that would, in the event that the appraisal process happened and that a value was determined, because the determination of value, the opinion of value wouldn't be final until that review process was completed and the reviewer and the appraiser signed on the dotted line. It would be at that point that there could be some sort of step would be appropriate, but it wouldn't be until that point. So I understand trying to get earlier in the process, but I don't believe that anything between the initial agreements on how the appraisal process is going to work and the agreement to initiate, between there and the final, the actual opinion of value being signed upon would be appropriate.
Further? No? Good. Okay. Committee, further questions to this point? Yes, Senator Boney.
Would you give us an update on the Pilot Hill project and where it's at?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Moniz, the Pilot Hill appraisal is in the review process. And so as such, the details of that, I'm not able to go into those appraisals, and those details are treated as confidential between the intended users and the clients of those reports. But it is currently in that review process, that back and forth.
Any anticipated time when that might conclude?
At the moment, I don't have I don't have a good idea of that, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Representative Henderson. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you give us an idea of how many ongoing appraisals you have now? And how does that compare to year over year?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, the appraisal workload is, as far as actual land appraisals and doing review appraisals of those, is directly tied to the amount of proposals that we have coming in. Currently, we do have a very large workload. There are a number of exchanges that are in process and that are coming in process as our Trust Land Management Division has tried to really start pushing some of those forward, in addition to the other duties of our appraisers on staff.
Go ahead. Thank you. Would you have an approximate number of those appraisals referring to?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, I believe there's currently 5 transactions that are currently in the review process. It's worth noting that on all of those, other than the one mentioned, our appraisers will be acting as review appraisers and not as the initial appraisers. Those appraisals will be provided by the proponents of those exchanges.
Yes, Representative Das, do you have something? Go ahead. You bet.
Chairman there, are these that you're talking about, are these actually exchanges land for land, or any of these outright sales of state property?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Tass, these are value for value land exchanges that I'm speaking of.
I didn't quite understand. Land for land?
Land for land.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Yep, you bet. Committee, any further questions? Okay. All right, so that concludes that section. Okay. All right, before let's see, it is 11:51. We'll go ahead quickly and move to, is there any public comment out there on this section? Any public comment? Okay, going once, going twice, public comment is closed. Committee, any proposals on this before we move on? Discussion? Okay. So, I think at this point, we'll go ahead and break for lunch. I don't know, how much further, how much longer do you think this will take to cover the rest of the material?
Mr. Chairman, that's up to you, how many questions you ask.
Understood.
Mr. Chairman, it would be a review of the stranded trust lands inventory and valuation matrix that we provided to you like about a year ago, I believe it was. And then just a few points of discussion on that. So I'm not sure, and there are maps attached to that, so I'm not sure how in depth you want to get into that. We would, because Lander Front and Fortification Creek are priorities for our office, and we are working through that process, and so I can't give you.
Okay, no, that's not it. Okay. I think, committee, if it's all right, unless there's any further questions to this point, we'll go ahead and break for lunch. I'd hope to wrap up sooner, but anyway, we'll go ahead and break for lunch and be back here at 1 o'clock to finish up. And, because I do think that there's a couple members who are gonna have, want to have some discussion on the remainder of our material, so. Anyway, we'll recess till 1 o'clock. So, all right.